Midnight. A hidden vault creaks open after centuries of silence. Inside lies not gold, but a scorched map, a silver cross, and a warning sealed by Rome. The Knights Templar didn't just guard treasure, they guarded knowledge the Church fought to erase. What if their real secret wasn't riches, but instructions, blueprints for power that could still change the world today? Follow their trail before it's silenced again, and uncover the story they tried to bury forever. Torches hiss in damp air, iron doors groan. On a cold slab sits a leather book, edges burned, marked with a red cross. This is not a legend, it is a field guide. The Templars wrote it in symbols and plain lines so soldiers, not scholars, could follow. They began as protectors of roads to Jerusalem. Soon they guarded ideas, safe routes, hidden caches, codes for moving wealth without coins. A way to send a message across Europe with no paper and no messenger. People called it a miracle. The Church called it power. Then came the arrests, dawn raids. Ledgers seized, men in white mantles dragged into stone rooms and told to confess. Many did not. What survived slipped into corners, ports, chapels, farms, and family vaults. Not holy chalices, but instructions for building, hiding, and navigating a dangerous world. This audiobook starts in motion. We pick up the dropped thread and walk. No fluff, no loud claims. Only what matters: where the orders went, how the ships left at night, why certain chapels hold maps in their walls, how a banking trick became a global habit, and what symbols still speak if you know how to listen. You will hear tools, not just tales, reading a Templar cipher at a glance, spotting a safe house window, understanding why Friday the 13th mattered, how a vow shaped a network, why some secrets were faith and others were logistics. Were treasure chests real? Sometimes. The bigger treasure was movement of men, money, and knowledge, fast, quiet, and safe. If parts of this story are missing, that is the point. They were meant to be. What was erased can be read by its outline. Hold a lamp close, the margins still whisper. The sound comes first. Iron on iron, a hollow knock echoing through stone halls before sunrise. Boots scrape against flagstones, men are dragged from their beds. It is October 13th, 1307 Friday morning in France. The king's order is clear. Arrest every Templar you can find, seize their houses, take their ledgers, and lock their doors. Across cities and villages, the same scene unfolds. White mantles lie crumpled on floors. Crosses stitched in red catch in candlelight before being torn away. The brothers, trained to ride for days without food, trained to hold silence, even under pain, are caught off guard, not by an enemy with swords, but by one with lists. Paper kills faster than steel that morning. What matters most is not the men themselves, but what they carried. Not relics, not golden chalices, not hidden grails. The real weight lies in instructions short, simple, stripped of decoration, a tally scratched into parchment, a cipher carved into wood, a code pressed into wax. These were the keys to moving wealth, knowledge, and safe passage across half a continent. The dawn raids targeted more than bodies. They targeted a network. For nearly 2 centuries, the Templars had mastered something kings envied: motion. Money moved from Paris to Acre without a coin touching daylight. Riders crossed frontiers without guards searching their saddlebags. A merchant could deposit wealth in London and withdraw it in Jerusalem. To the outside eye, it looked like magic. To the Templars, it was a system built on vows, memory, and discipline. The arrest orders spoke of heresy, blasphemy, secret rites, but underneath the official charges was another fear, the fear of a system outside royal reach. The king wanted gold, the church wanted obedience, and the Templars held both in forms neither crown nor crozier could easily touch. That morning, as cells filled, documents disappeared, yet not all. Some burned before hands could seize them. Some were passed to lay brothers, farmers, widows, and millers who owed their livelihoods to the temple. Some instructions were never written down at all, carried only in trained memory, simple enough for a soldier to recall in the dark, yet strong enough to move armies. Imagine a knight in chains whispering to his jailer, "Look at the chapel window near the river. Count the stones. The fifth marks the way." A hint, nothing more. The knowledge survives not in tomes, but in habits, routines, and little codes spread across Europe. Arrests could break men but not erase methods. That morning taught the survivors a rule they already knew. Never place all the treasure in one chest. Never write all the truth in one book. Spread it thin, hide it in daily life, let it live in barns, ships, roads, and walls. When doors slammed shut at dawn, the network shifted underground. The scene is often painted with drama fires, torture, confessions. But the quiet detail matters more. A single horse groom slipping a parchment into a grain sack, a clerk who copies a cipher on the back of a bill of sale, a mason carving a symbol into a lintel as if it were mere ornament. The arrests did not end the story. They forced it to change form. The door at dawn closed on men in mantles, but the outline of what they carried, the systems they built, still walks in shadow. The raids were meant to erase. Instead, they scattered seeds, each seed small, but each carrying a whole order folded into silence. And so the chapter opens not with relics lost, but with instructions planted. The knowledge would not return as grand ceremony. It would appear in whispers, chapels, stone marks, and trade practices that outlived both king and pope. A network dismantled in public grew stronger in private, and the door at dawn, slammed shut in 1307, opened another one into centuries of quiet survival. A road looks simple. Dirt, stone, wheel ruts, maybe a shrine at the crossroads. To a traveller, it is just the way from one town to another. To the Templars, the road was the bloodstream of their order. Control the roads, protect the roads, and hide in the roads. Fire and salt, the simplest tools of travel. Fire to signal, salt to preserve. The Templars used them as code and supply. Along dangerous stretches, small fires burned on ridges, not bonfires too obvious, just enough flame to mark a turn, a ford, a fork. At night, a rider could read the land by glimmers of orange, knowing which valley was safe and which bend hid ambush. To the untrained eye, they were shepherds' signals or farmers' burning brush. To the trained brother, they were a map alive in the dark. Salt was the other half. It preserved meat, cured wounds, and most importantly, bought loyalty. A sack of salt at the right innkeeper's door meant safe lodging. A pinch left on a chapel altar signalled that a rider had passed and all was clear. Where gold drew suspicion, salt passed unnoticed, a small grain carrying a message across miles. The Templars did not build every road, but they marked them. Wells dug deeper than needed, always covered by flat stones. Milestones set not at random, but aligned with distant towers. Shrines placed where two paths crossed, hiding symbols in carvings no peasant would question. To move fast, you need trust in what you cannot see. The roads gave that trust. Merchants loved the Templars for this. A trader hauling wool or grain could deposit his wealth in one commandery and ride light. Bandits could steal his wagon, but the true value was already safe in the temple script. That trust turned rough tracks into arteries of commerce. Kings taxed trade, but the Templars guided it. When roads closed in war, the order found detours no one else dared. Mountain passes with hidden markers, forest paths cleared just enough for horses at night. Villages where children were taught to light candles at certain hours, signalling safe passage. Roads of fire and salt became less about physical paths and more about habits. Every rider knew where the next water source lay. Every brother could read the stars as easily as mile markers. They built memory into the land, embedding safe passage in stones, wells and shrines, so that even when raids scattered them, the roots lived on. That is why centuries later, farmers still found strange carvings in boundary walls, symbols no one could explain, why certain chapels faced slightly off from the village, why wells in remote fields seemed deeper than needed. The land itself had been turned into a map, written not on parchment but in habit and stone. A road is never just a road. With fire and salt, the Templars made every path a thread in a web, stretching from London to Jerusalem, stitched into the earth so tightly that even after their fall, pieces of it still hum beneath Europe's soil. The knights took 3 vows: poverty, chastity, obedience. To many, these sound like chains, rules that stripped men of comfort and freedom. But to the Templars, the vows were keys. Together, they created a network no bribe, no seduction, and no rebellion could easily break. Poverty first. A Templar owned nothing. His horse, his armour, his cloak, none were his. All belonged to the order. This stripped away the usual leverage enemies held over men. You cannot threaten to burn a knight's fields if he has no fields. You cannot seize his fortune if he has no purse. With nothing personal to lose, his loyalty flowed only upward. The system became resistant to corruption. Chastity was not only about purity, it was about focus. No wife meant no divided loyalty. No children meant no inheritance to secure, no legacy to fight for. Every rider belonged wholly to the cause. Enemies could not bribe a Templar with promises of land for his heirs. There were no heirs. His lineage was the order itself. Obedience bound the structure together. A knight followed orders without hesitation, trusting that his superior acted for the whole. This made them move like one body across distances. If a commander ordered a shift of resources, it happened without delay. A banking script could travel from Portugal to Acre without debate because obedience meant the system always came before the individual. Together, the vows turned thousands of men into parts of one machine. Each man a node, each commandery a hub, each vow the wire connecting them. This was the network kings feared, a disciplined, incorruptible system where loyalty was not to a monarch or pope, but to the rule itself. Even after the arrests, the vows lingered as habits. Farmers who sheltered brothers remembered their silence. Merchants who dealt with the order recalled the trust born of poverty, no bribes, only service. Builders who learned from Templar masons kept discipline that echoed obedience. The vows were not just promises whispered in chapels. They were architecture. Remove the vows, and the structure collapses. Keep them alive, and the network persists, even without a name. That is why, centuries later, echoes still remain in guilds, in banks, in traditions of discipline that outlast any king's decree. The church thought it could erase men, but vows are harder to erase than flesh. Once spoken, they weave into the mind and into the habits of daily life. Poverty, chastity, obedience, the 3 cords braided into one rope strong enough to cross centuries. And so the network was never just castles, ships, or treasure. It was men bound by vows, living ciphers whose very lives were the encryption. To break the order, you would have to break the vows. But vows spoken in faith do not shatter easily. They echo, quiet but enduring, in stone, in road, in ritual. That echo still hums, faint but steady, wherever the network once walked. A merchant arrives in Paris with heavy wagons. Silver coins clink in wooden chests, guarded by armed men who look more nervous with every mile. Bandits lurk along roads. Taxes threaten at city gates. Every step with gold on wheels is risk. He does not want to carry this burden to Marseille or across the sea to Acre. He needs safety. He needs speed. He walks to a Templar commandery where walls are plain, doors strong, and brothers silent. There he places his coins not in a vault, but in the hands of the order. In return, he receives nothing more than a mark on parchment, a token, or even a simple phrase. When he reaches Acre months later, another commandery gives him back wealth equal to what he left behind. No coin travelled, yet his fortune crossed borders. This is paperless banking. It looks like magic to outsiders, but in truth, it is discipline, memory, and trust. The Templars turned vows into currency. A knight with no wife, no child, no personal wealth became the perfect vessel for carrying numbers across distance. Nothing to bribe, nothing to seize, nothing to steal. When a rider left Paris with no coin in his saddlebags, he carried wealth all the same encrypted in his mind, hidden in ciphers, whispered in phrases known only to the order. At times they used tallies, carved sticks split in half. One half stayed in Paris, the other rode with the messenger. Fit the halves together, and the account proved real. Other times they used simple marks that looked like meaningless scratches to strangers, but told trained brothers the value owed. Some scripts were disguised as prayers, the number of words, the sequence of psalms carrying hidden meaning. The church called them soldiers of Christ, but merchants called them bankers. Kings called them dangerous. A crown could be weighed down with debt without a single chest of gold leaving Templar walls. Nobles learned that the order could shift armies of coin as easily as knights on a field. That made the temple less a religious order and more a network stronger than any throne. What is remarkable is not the system's invention, but its simplicity. They did not need parchment in every hand, or sealed ledgers in every saddlebag. They needed memory trained in obedience, numbers carried by men who owned nothing, loyalty written into vows. Paper burns. Gold can be melted. A man bound by silence, walking with nothing in his hands, is harder to rob. The system spread because it worked. Traders trusted it, pilgrims used it, even kings leaned on it. A peasant saw only white mantles riding past, but behind those cloaks lay a web of value stretching from England to the Levant. When the arrests came, the ledgers were seized. But much of the system could not be seized. It was alive in men's habits, in codes known by heart, in the very idea that wealth could be moved without touching metal. That idea survived, disguised, passed forward, until modern banks rose centuries later. The vaults today hum with machines, but the skeleton beneath the idea that paper or symbol can stand for gold was the Templars' quiet gift. So the treasure was never only gold hidden under chapels. It was this: the proof that money could move faster than a horse, lighter than a feather, safer than a chest. Paperless banking, born in vows, outlived the men who whispered it. The church tried to erase them, but every time you hand over a note or card instead of coin, you echo their system. The knights are gone. The method remains. Beneath the stones of Jerusalem, tunnels stretch like veins through rock. When the Templars first took residence on the Temple Mount, rumours began at once. People whispered that they dug for relics, hunting for the Ark of the Covenant, the treasures of Solomon, or hidden scrolls that could upend the church. The stories grew with every retelling, until myth weighed heavier than stone. But the reality was more practical. Soldiers need storage. An army needs secure rooms for grain, weapons, saddles, water, and coin. Beneath the mount, the Templars found not just sacred legend, but a fortress waiting to be used. The vaults became supply depots, their walls cool and hidden, their entrances narrow and easily defended. Still, secrecy breeds stories. Pilgrims saw knights vanish into tunnels and emerge hours later, cloaked in dust. Local guides claimed the brothers carried relics up from the earth. Chroniclers painted pictures of gold and prophecy hidden in chests. Perhaps some fragments of old scrolls surfaced, perhaps some artifacts of ancient kings. But the true treasure was simpler and, in its own way, more powerful safe space. In a city where walls shifted with every siege, the Templars controlled chambers no enemy could burn or sack without blood and time. The vaults also became places of record. Ledgers could be stored there, contracts hidden from rival eyes. While rumours spread of grails and arks, the more likely contents were the mundane but vital tools of power: tallies, tokens, lists of accounts, maps of roads, names of allies. Such scraps, more than relics, were what kings wanted seized centuries later. A chalice can be hidden in a chest. A ledger can change a kingdom's fortune, yet myth has its use. By allowing whispers of relics, the order hid the truth of logistics. A king may waste effort searching for holy objects while overlooking supply lists. Pilgrims may believe the knights guarded sacred mysteries, while in truth they guarded sacks of grain and hidden coin. The smoke of legend protected the fire of practice. What remains undeniable is that under the Temple Mount, the Templars learned the power of underground. They saw that the earth itself could hide wealth better than walls above. That lesson followed them back to Europe. Chapels with crypts, commanderies with cellars, barns with double floors, these were the children of the Jerusalem vaults. When the church turned on them, the myth of hidden relics became both weapon and shield. Accusers claimed they guarded secrets too dangerous for faith. The order said little, as always. Silence allowed stories to multiply. Perhaps that was their last defense. Better to be accused of guarding the ark than to have kings understand they guarded ledgers proving royal debt. So beneath stone and rumour lies the truth. The vaults were not magic. They were storage, practical and disciplined. And yet, in being practical, they became more dangerous than relics. Because relics inspire devotion, but systems move power. The Templars learned this underground. And when their enemies thought they searched for grails, they were in fact perfecting logistics that would outlast their fall. Walk through a village chapel built in the 12th century. The walls are plain, the windows narrow, yet look closely and patterns emerge. A cross not aligned with the rest, a window carved with an extra notch, a sequence of stones that repeats like numbers. To the peasant, it is decoration. To the knight, it is signal. The Templars used stone as their silent language. Roads could be blocked, letters could be seized. But stone remained, fixed and unnoticed, carrying meaning for those trained to see. A carving on a lintel might mark a safe house. A misplaced star above a doorway might point to water nearby. Even the angle of a chapel could serve as guide, its axis pointing toward a hidden path or a supply site. This system was not complex. It had to be simple, for soldiers, not scholars. 3 cuts in a stone meant one thing, 4 meant another. Circles, crosses, triangles, easy to carve, easy to read, meaningless to outsiders. A rider arriving in a strange town could walk once around the church and know where to find shelter, food, or allies. Stone signals also built memory. Every brother who carved them felt part of a chain. The act itself became ritual, linking one commandery to another. These were not grand codes meant to amaze. They were practical notes written in the hardest paper available. And because they were carved into the fabric of villages, they survived long after the order fell. Some survive still. Masons copied the patterns without knowing meaning, passing symbols into guild traditions. Builders repeated designs for beauty, not realizing they once carried instructions. The symbols became ghosts, shadows of a language no longer spoken, but still visible. Enemies accused the Templars of secrecy, of rituals hidden from the church. The truth is simpler and, in its way, more powerful. Their secrecy lived in stone, not in heresy. While priests preached inside chapels, the walls themselves whispered instructions to those who could read them. When the arrests came, when papers burned and tongues broke under torture, the stones remained. Silent, patient, carrying signals across centuries. Anyone who knows how to look can still see them, carved into forgotten corners, unnoticed by tourists, but still marking paths once walked by riders in white. In the end, the Templars trusted stone more than words. Because paper burns, because men die, but stone holds memory, and when all else was erased, the stone spoke still. The cross was everywhere. On cloaks, on shields, on banners that caught the wind above battle lines. To most eyes, it was a symbol of faith, a sign of devotion and sacrifice. To the Templars, it was also a code. The order learned early that the simplest mark carried the deepest meaning. A cross was more than decoration. It could signal direction, ownership, even a message between brothers. The colour mattered, the angle mattered. A tilted arm could tell a rider to seek shelter in a nearby house. A cross scratched into wood could mean food was stored in a hidden room. Knights trained to read these signs as naturally as they read the sky. A cloak laid over a windowsill with its cross visible might indicate safe passage. A cross cut shallow into a doorframe could mean the opposite, that danger was near, that a brother had been captured, that silence was required. These codes were practical, stripped of flourish, designed for men who rode through danger every day. The quiet code lived not just in symbols, but in speech. Brothers used words that sounded ordinary, but carried layered meaning. A prayer repeated in a certain sequence could confirm identity. A phrase about bread might be more than piety. It could signal that coin was available or that supplies had been secured. In markets and inns, these phrases passed without suspicion. To those outside, they were fragments of devotion. To those inside, they were orders, warnings, or reassurances. The genius of the system was its invisibility. Priests, kings, even merchants heard only prayers or saw only decorations. They did not realize that the same cross they blessed could also guide an entire network. The Templars turned faith into cover. Their enemies could not forbid the cross, it was too holy. They could not silence prayers, they were too common. And so the order moved in plain sight, hidden by the very faith their accusers claimed they betrayed. This is why confessions at trials sound confused. Men under torture admitted to spitting on the cross, denying Christ, mocking rituals. But what if the rituals were codes mistaken for blasphemy? A gesture meant to indicate silence could be twisted into insult. A mark used to confirm identity could be painted as heresy. The church looked for sin, but often what they found were signals, stripped of context, easy to misinterpret. The Red Cross was more than symbol. It was shield, signal, and cipher all at once. It allowed men to recognize one another in foreign lands. It marked goods that could move safely. It whispered messages where words would betray. And it endured because a cross cannot be outlawed. Even today, in villages across Europe, you see crosses carved into lintels, painted on doors, stitched into banners. Some are faith alone, some may be echoes of the quiet code. The language is mostly lost, but the symbols remain, standing silent against stone, carrying the memory of a network that hid in plain sight. Imagine a knight setting out on a journey across mountains and rivers, with no parchment map in his pack. He carries no scroll, no inked chart. Yet he knows every turn of the path, every hidden spring, every crossing that matters. His map is not in paper. It is in the land itself. The Templars built maps you could walk. They relied on landscape as memory, turning ridges, rivers, and valleys into guides. A bend in a river became a marker. A line of oaks showed direction. A mountain peak at a certain angle signalled where the safe house lay. The land itself became the parchment, too vast to burn, too permanent to erase. They taught brothers to read the earth like scripture. The sun at dawn told distance. The stars at night gave alignment. A stream flowing east was a signpost, leading to a known village. A patch of unusual stone might mark buried supplies. When one rider passed another, he needed no map to hand over only a few words. Ride until the ridge cuts the sky, then follow the oak line. That was enough. This method was born of necessity. Parchment was costly, fragile, and dangerous if seized. Maps carried risk. If a messenger was caught, the entire network could be exposed. But memory was safe. A man could ride with only the clothes on his back, yet carry an entire region's geography in his mind. To train memory, the order used repetition. Novices rode paths again and again, tracing routes until they could recall every detail. They turned journeys into chants: 3 wells, 1 chapel, a stone arch, then south. These rhythms stuck in the mind, becoming living maps. The system grew flexible. Roads shifted, villages burned, borders changed. But the land remained. A king might close a bridge, but the river still curved. An enemy might build a fort, but the stars still aligned. Maps you can walk adapt to time because they are carved into nature itself. Legends say the Templars carried secret charts of Jerusalem, of buried tunnels and vaults. Perhaps, but their truest maps were not inked, they were remembered, they were walked. That is why, centuries later, stories still whisper of hidden routes, pilgrim paths, and forgotten crossings. Some may be legend. Some may be echoes of a system that once stretched across continents. To this day, shepherd trails in Spain, forest paths in France, mountain passes in the Alps bear signs that seem older than they should. Carvings in stones, lines of trees planted deliberately, shrines at odd angles, all may be remnants of maps designed not to be seen but to be walked. The Templars trusted the earth. Paper fades, ink smears, but a mountain peak endures, and so their maps survived not in archives but in landscapes. Anyone with eyes to see could follow them. Anyone who remembered could ride across kingdoms with no guide but the stars and the land itself. To the casual eye, it was a farm, a low barn, fields of wheat, a millstone grinding grain. Villagers brought harvests, children played in the yard, animals grazed nearby. But to the Templars, this was more than a farm. It was a warehouse. The order built storage into plain life. Grain barns doubled as depots for supplies. Mills, always busy with noise and dust, hid caches of coin or weapons. Inns, where travellers slept, became transfer points for information. Each site served 2 purposes ordinary to outsiders, extraordinary to insiders. This method was their strength. Unlike castles or fortresses, which drew eyes and envy, farms and inns passed unnoticed. A king might covet a fortress, but he ignored a mill. An enemy might burn a castle, but he would leave a barn standing for its use. Hidden in plain sight, the order's warehouses became invisible veins feeding their network. Merchants knew this system well. A man travelling with wool could leave it in a Templar farm marked by simple signs. Weeks later, he could reclaim it at another site. No ledger needed to pass through risky hands, only memory and trust. The barns looked ordinary, but inside them, value shifted silently. Villagers benefited too. A farm run by the order brought stability. Crops were stored safely. Roads nearby were patrolled. Local markets grew strong. The Templars built goodwill into their system, ensuring that villages became allies. Who would betray the order if the barn fed their children through winter? The genius lay in how ordinary it all appeared. Unlike kings with treasuries locked in palaces, the Templars spread wealth thin, across hundreds of small, unnoticed sites. If one was seized, the rest endured. If one was burned, supplies could be replaced. The network could not be destroyed in a single blow. During the arrests, officials expected vaults of gold, treasures piled high. They found little. They did not understand that the treasure was scattered across farms, mills, and inns, each holding small parts of a whole. The wealth was not in one chest. It was in the system itself. Even centuries later, some of these barns and inns still stand, folded into ordinary life. Travellers see old farmhouses with unusual thickness in walls, odd trapdoors in floors, hidden alcoves that serve no clear purpose. These are echoes of warehouses in plain sight, remnants of a time when the Order's greatest strength was invisibility. The Church accused them of secrecy, of hiding forbidden things. In truth, the secrecy was practical. To survive, they turned daily life into camouflage. Bread ovens baked loaves for villagers, but also heated rooms where messages were sealed. Grain bins fed animals, but also stored coin sacks beneath false bottoms. Everything ordinary could carry double meaning. The barns, mills, and inns were not treasures themselves. They were containers, vessels that made treasure mobile, invisible, and safe. And that is why, when the hammer fell in 1307, so little was seized. The wealth had already melted into the countryside, hidden in plain sight, scattered where no crown could find it. A knight in white mantle looked powerful on the field, steel glinting, horse stamping, sword at his side. But the real measure of strength was not his blade, it was his bread, his armour, his silence. These three made the Order more formidable than armies 3 times their size. Armour was more than protection. It was uniformity. Each brother looked nearly identical, his mail glimmering in the same dull light, his cloak marked with the same red cross. Enemies spoke of them riding like one man, and that was by design. The armour stripped away individuality, leaving only the collective. Behind it, you could not tell wealth from poverty, noble from peasant. In battle, this erased hesitation. A soldier fought not for his family name, but for the Order stitched onto his cloak. Armour also carried hidden design. The Order perfected layers that allowed endurance in heat and protection in cold. A knight could ride for days, sweat burning under mail, yet still maintain strength. Their smiths, often working in hidden forges attached to farms, crafted gear both durable and replaceable. Uniformity meant that when one knight fell, his armour fit another. The battlefield became a place of interchange, where parts shifted seamlessly. But armour alone is useless without bread. The Order knew that wars were lost not by swords, but by hunger. Behind every charge rode wagons of grain, carts of salted meat, bags of dried figs. Their barns, hidden across Europe and the Levant, ensured that bread reached the front lines. Villages near Templar houses knew that where knights stayed, fields prospered. Their grain was not hoarded but cycled, moving from farm to rider, from rider to march. Bread became code too. The breaking of bread was a ritual across Christendom, but within the Order it held layered meaning. To share bread was to confirm loyalty, to pass silent agreement. A loaf might hold a small mark, cut before baking, indicating safe routes. Bakers became part of the network, their ovens turning grain into sustenance and message alike. Then there was silence. This vow turned the Templars into an enigma, while other knights boasted they withheld. In taverns, where tongues loosened over ale, they said little. In courts, where kings demanded answers, they gave less. Silence frustrated allies. But it also protected the network. Secrets carried by men who would not speak could not easily be broken. Silence also forged discipline. In battle, orders passed through hand signals, not shouts. A raised lance, a turn of shield, a shift of horse, all carried meaning. To the enemy, it looked like uncanny coordination. To the knights, it was simply the practice of silence made visible. Words were too slow, gestures were faster, trust was faster still. Armour, bread, and silence together formed a trinity of survival. Armour made the knight anonymous, a part of the whole. Bread kept him alive and connected him to the hidden veins of supply. Silence turned his body into both weapon and shield, unreadable to those outside. This is why the Order endured as long as it did. Not because of miracles, but because of discipline. Kings could raise armies, but they could not teach silence. Lords could build castles, but they could not ensure bread moved like blood through a body. Smiths could forge armour, but they could not erase the individual beneath it. When the dawn raids came, the church tried to break silence. Torture rooms echoed with screams, but confessions were uneven, fragmented, contradictory. Many knights died with secrets intact. They had lived their whole lives in silence. Dying in silence was no different. The legacy of armour, bread, and silence outlasted them. Uniform armies, supply chains, and coded discipline became the foundation of modern war. Their enemies thought they fought zealots. In truth, they fought logistics wrapped in steel, fueled by grain, guarded by silence, and that was harder to kill than any man. The sea has always been the great escape. Waves leave no tracks, and the horizon swallows pursuit. The Templars knew this well. While land raids could corner them, water always offered another path. Their ships, small and unassuming, became their lifeline. This was the Night Fleet. La Rochelle on the French coast was the beating heart of it. A bustling port, filled with fishermen, merchants, and sailors, it seemed ordinary. Yet by night, ships slipped away with no fanfare, sails catching moonlight, cargo hidden in plain crates. Some carried grain, some carried wood, some carried coin tucked beneath more mundane goods. The genius of the fleet was its ordinariness. To the crown's men, they looked like merchant vessels. To the order, they were arteries pulsing with survival. The ships served three purposes: transport, escape, and message. They moved supplies across seas faster than land caravans. They carried brothers fleeing raids, cloaked as crew or traders. And they passed news, quicker and safer than riders on war-torn roads. A letter could vanish on land, but survive tucked in the hull of a ship, hidden beneath salt fish. The Night Fleet moved not just objects, but ideas. Rumours spread of relics carried westward, treasures vanishing into the Atlantic. Perhaps some truth lies there. A fleet departing La Rochelle the night before, arrests could have carried chests heavy with coin or scrolls. But more valuable than gold was the knowledge they carried: contacts, names, routes, the skeleton of the network itself. Ships are harder to seize than castles. A castle can be surrounded. A ship can vanish over the horizon. That was the Order's advantage. They built a shadow navy in plain sight, blending with the merchant class. Fishermen sailed by day. By night, they carried secrets. This is why, after the fall, rumours clung to the sea. Some whispered that ships reached Scotland, carrying men who seeded new orders in shadow. Others claimed voyages crossed farther west, touching lands unknown. True or not, the fleet's secrecy left room for legend. The absence of proof became proof itself. The Night Fleet mattered because it turned the Order into something larger than land. While kings thought in castles, the Templars thought in coasts. They stitched Europe with water routes, their maps written in tides and currents. When raids struck inland houses, the sea carried what mattered away. Even now, sailors in old ports tell stories of ghost ships, sails white in moonlight, vanishing before dawn. Perhaps legend, perhaps echo. The Templars knew that survival depended not on standing ground, but on moving fast. The Night Fleet was that movement, the silent breath of the Order, slipping into darkness, unseen yet unstoppable. The date still lingers in superstition. Friday the 13th, a day of bad luck, whispered with unease. Its roots lie not in myth, but in a single dawn when doors burst open and an order was crushed. October 13, 1307. In France, the king's men moved with lists in hand, every Templar house, every chapel, every farm marked for seizure. At dawn, they stormed doors, dragging knights from their beds, shackling them before villages. The arrests were swift, coordinated, merciless. The charges were grave: heresy, blasphemy, unnatural rituals. Accusations designed to stain, to strip away centuries of respect in a single blow. But beneath them lay debt. King Philip IV owed the Templars more gold than he could repay. To erase the debt, he erased the order. The Church, pressured, lent its blessing. Thus, a day of faith turned into betrayal. What followed was confusion. Some knights confessed under torture, their words twisted into proof. Others remained silent, enduring flame and rack without speaking. Records contradict, testimonies collide. Were there hidden rituals? Perhaps. Were their codes mistaken for blasphemy? Likely. But the truth mattered less than the spectacle. The arrests sent a message. No power would stand outside crown and cross. Friday the 13th became more than a raid. It became erasure, documents burned, houses seized, ships vanished, brothers fled or died. The network that had stretched from Scotland to Jerusalem fractured in a single morning. Yet, like all forced erasures, pieces endured. Farms still bore hidden stores. Roads still carried invisible maps. Ships still sailed under quiet flags. The king could seize men, but not systems. The superstition remains because the wound was deep. An order that had once stood as guardian of pilgrims was dragged through mud as heretics. Villagers who once trusted them saw them chained. The image of white cloaks stained black lingered, leaving Friday the 13th marked with shadow ever since. Yet behind the superstition lies irony. The king hoped the date would mark an end. Instead, it marked a beginning of legends, of whispers, of survival in shadow. What was meant to be the death of the order became the seed of myth, and so, centuries later, when people shiver at Friday the 13th, they echo that dawn. Not the dawn of bad luck, but the dawn when silence and secrecy slipped into history, carrying their secrets into the future, the cold chambers of Paris filled with echoes that winter. Iron chains clinked against stone floors. Guards dragged men from their cells into halls lit by sputtering torches. Tables held parchment, quills, seals of authority. Behind them sat clerks, bishops, and inquisitors. In front of them, the Templars, once knights on the battlefield, now prisoners in robes stained with dirt. These were the trials. To the public, the accusations sounded terrifying: spitting on the cross, worshipping false idols, secret rites carried out at night. But when the records are read closely, contradictions surface. One man said they denied Christ. Another swore they praised him more than any priest. Some described a head made of metal. Others insisted it was a carved skull. The scripts of these trials do not align. The reason is clear: torture and fear. A knight stretched on the rack will say what the questioner demands. A brother, burned with irons, will admit to blasphemy, heresy, anything to stop the pain. The confessions were less about truth and more about control. Yet the Church wrote them down as proof, sealing each confession with authority. These scripts remain in archives, fragile and brittle, still whispering contradictions across centuries. The Templars, trained in silence, tried to resist. Some confessed, then later recanted when the pain lifted. Others never broke, dying with sealed lips. What emerges is a fractured record, bits of truth, layers of invention, all written down in neat lines of ink that belie the chaos of the chamber. Yet hidden in the cracks are glimpses of something deeper. Some brothers spoke of rituals at night, vows taken in secrecy, gestures misunderstood by priests. Could these have been codes, signals mistaken for heresy? The Church wanted sin, the knights offered silence. Where silence failed, words twisted under duress filled the gap. The scripts also reveal something else: the power of paperwork. A single confession, copied and sealed, travelled faster than rumour. Villagers who had trusted the knights now read lines that branded them as heretics. The ink killed reputation more thoroughly than swords. For centuries, the Templars had mastered paperless banking, trusting in memory and symbol. In the end, paper became their undoing. but the trials did not erase them entirely. Copies of confessions survive. Some are faint, some nearly illegible, yet they show a pattern, a system being dismantled on parchment. And here lies the irony. What was written to destroy also preserved. Without the scripts, we would know little of what happened in those halls. Their very destruction became record, so the trials remind us that history is fragile. Truth does not sit whole on paper. It shatters into fragments. The Templars endured fire and chains, but their silence ensured that much of their system remained hidden. The Church thought it had captured all. In truth, it captured shadows and contradictions. The real knowledge roots, codes, vows, remained unwritten, slipping away while clerks dipped quills into ink. The trials condemned men, but they could not condemn the network. Scripts outlasted flesh, but the silence of the order outlasted scripts. That is why, even today, we read the accusations and find more questions than answers. Not all rooms in France held only chains. In the fortress of Chinon, far from the noise of Paris, another record unfolded quieter, less known, yet just as important. Here, in 1308, a group of high-ranking Templars stood before cardinals sent by the Pope himself. These men, weary from prison, but still resolute, confessed not to heresy, but to the strain of survival. The parchment created there is different. Known now as the Chinon parchment, discovered centuries later in the Vatican's archives, it records something remarkable: absolution. The Pope's envoys listened, questioned, and ultimately forgave. They declared the order not heretical, but flawed, in need of correction, not destruction. It was a moment of mercy buried in ink, hidden from kings who demanded blood. This paper trail shows the fracture between church and crown. King Philip wanted the order erased, its wealth seized, its name destroyed. The Pope, under pressure, bent to politics, but left a faint signature of truth. The Chinon document whispered, "These men were not devils. They were soldiers of Christ who stumbled but did not fall into damnation." Why, then, was this absolution hidden? Why buried in vaults, forgotten for centuries? Because kings write louder than popes. Philip controlled the narrative, spreading tales of heresy that justified seizures. The Church, fearful of appearing weak, allowed the louder voice to dominate. But in a quiet chamber, with ink on parchment, a different judgment was recorded. The Chinon parchment is important not for what it saved, but for what it reveals. The order was not universally condemned. Within the heart of power, there was doubt, even forgiveness. But history chose the louder script. For centuries, people believed the knights damned. Only in recent decades did the parchment surface, shifting the story. It teaches another lesson. Paper can both erase and preserve. The same church that allowed trials also kept records that contradicted them. Hidden in its vaults lay proof that the order had not been fully betrayed. Had the parchment remained lost, silence alone would have spoken. With it, we glimpse that the truth was always more complex. The Chinon record stands as quiet resistance, a note of humanity in a symphony of destruction. It reminds us that history is not one story, but layers of voices, some shouted, some whispered, some buried for centuries before being found. The Templars themselves may not have known of this absolution. By the time the ink dried, many were dead or broken, but the paper survived, carrying forward a message they never heard, that at least in one chamber, under one pope, forgiveness was offered. In the end, the Chinon parchment shows us that even in destruction, traces of mercy survive. Portugal did something no other kingdom dared. While France hunted the Templars, while England seized their lands, while papal bulls condemned them, Portugal transformed them. The knights did not vanish there, they changed their name. They became the Order of Christ. King Denis of Portugal saw what others missed. He knew that to destroy the Templars entirely was to cripple his own realm. Their ships patrolled his coasts. Their farms fed his people. Their knowledge of banking and roads fueled his trade. To erase them would be to weaken his crown. So instead, he offered a door. Walk through, change your cloak, keep your skills. The temple ended, the order of Christ began. This transition shows the adaptability of the network. It was never only about faith. It was logistics, navigation, trust. In Portugal, these threads continued under new banners. The Order of Christ inherited the ships, the ports, the warehouses. They became explorers, guiding Portugal into the age of discovery. The same fleet that once carried supplies to the Holy Land now carried caravels into the Atlantic. This survival also reveals the truth of the vows. Poverty, chastity, obedience. They shaped men into vessels of service, not personal gain. When the name changed, the vows remained. The discipline endured, even if the cross on the cloak was stitched differently. Continuity lay not in symbol, but in practice. The Order of Christ shows how secrets outlive suppression. France may have burned knights, but Portugal turned their knowledge into sails that reached Africa, Brazil, India. Some of the greatest voyages of the 15th century bore the mark of Templar survival, cloaked in new robes. Henry the Navigator himself was Grand Master of the Order of Christ. The Templar legacy steered caravels into seas no European had charted, so the story is not only one of destruction, it is also one of transformation. Where one king saw heresy, another saw utility. Where one throne sought erasure, another sought continuity. The Templars, scattered elsewhere, survived as shadows and whispers. In Portugal, they survived as sailors and builders, their knowledge carried openly, their vows still binding. This chapter of survival teaches that systems adapt, names change, banners shift, but discipline endures. The Templars became the Order of Christ, and in doing so, they ensured their knowledge would not be buried. Instead, it would cross oceans, shape empires, and write the next chapter of Europe's expansion. What kings tried to erase in France took root in Portugal and blossomed into discovery, and so the Templar story did not end with chains in Paris. It set sail from Lisbon, bound for horizons unknown, carrying secrets disguised as navigation, vows disguised as discipline, and a network disguised as exploration. The night sea is a place of silence. No walls, no roads, only water stretching into blackness. To most men, this emptiness is fear. To the Templars, it was opportunity. They learned to move across it, not with charts filled with ink, but with compass, star, and wake. These three became their invisible map. The compass, at first, was not the polished tool we imagine. It was crude, a needle balanced on wood, a fragment of iron stroking against stone until magnetized. Yet in a world where clouds hid the stars, this needle became revelation. The Order trusted it when others doubted. Sailors muttered of dark magic, fearing the pull of an unseen force. The Templars, bound by vows of discipline, embraced it. They used the compass not as curiosity, but as standard, building routes others thought impossible. When skies cleared, the stars took command. Brothers trained their eyes on constellations, as though reading scripture. Orion's belt marked winter routes. The North Star held steady above. The tilt of the moon whispered of tides. This knowledge did not stay in libraries. It lived in men's memories, passed by repetition, confirmed on deck in whispered lessons. Count the degrees of Orion's tilt, one knight would say, and you know how close you are to shore. Such learning became as natural as prayer, but the wake was the truest signature. A ship leaves a trail not seen in ink, but felt by those aboard. The sway of the stern, the shift of waves, the pattern of foam they spoke to trained eyes. Templars knew when they strayed too far west, or when the current dragged them south, simply by watching how the water curled behind them. The sea itself wrote on its surface, and the Order learned to read it. Together, compass, star, and wake formed a living system of navigation. This system allowed ships to vanish by night and arrive by dawn in ports far beyond the reach of royal guards. While the king's men waited on roads, Templar ships slid silently into hidden harbours, guided by forces that could not be bribed, seized, or burned. Rumours followed. Some said they sailed by magic, others that demons guided them. In truth, they trusted what was available to everyman nature, but they trusted it more completely, stripped of superstition, guided by discipline. This made them dangerous. While kings thought of borders, the Templars thought of currents. While priests prayed for safe passage, the Templars calculated stars. The legacy of compass, star, and wake endures. These methods seeded the skills later used by explorers under the Order of Christ in Portugal. The same tools that once carried coin to acre later carried caravels to Africa and beyond. Knowledge once whispered in cloisters, now stretched across oceans. So when we speak of Templar secrets, we must not imagine only relics in hidden vaults. Their greatest secrets were skills practical, repeatable, enduring. The compass that others feared, they mastered. The stars that others saw as distant mystery, they treated as signposts. The wake that others ignored, they read as scripture. These three tools gave them freedom no raid could cage. And freedom, more than gold, was the treasure kings envied most. When France burned, when knights hung from gallows, when silence fell over commanderies, some survivors fled north. Beyond England, beyond the grip of papal decrees, lay Scotland, a land of rough hills, scattered villages, and kings locked in war with England. In this shadow, the Templars found refuge. Scotland was fractured, but in fracture lay safety. English armies pressed, papal bulls carried little weight, and local lords sought allies wherever they could find them. A band of trained knights, skilled in logistics and silence, was welcome. Some stories say they fought beside Robert the Bruce at Bannockburn. Whether myth or truth, the idea endures. In the mist of Scotland, the Order's shadow lengthened. Evidence lingers in stone. Certain chapels, built in the years after the fall, carry marks not unlike those carved in Templar sites elsewhere. Crosses at odd angles, symbols embedded in walls. Rosslyn Chapel is the most famous, carved with patterns that whisper of hidden knowledge, though built decades after the arrests. Perhaps it was memory preserved in stone, perhaps echo of whispered lore. In Scotland, the Templars blended with guilds. Stonemasons, builders of cathedrals and castles, absorbed fragments of the knight's habits. Discipline, secrecy, coded symbols, these passed naturally into craft traditions. What began as vows of warriors became rituals of builders. Over time, stories of hidden brotherhoods grew, seeded by these fragments. The shadow in Scotland was not an order reborn, but a survival of practice. Farms run by families with distant ties continued routines of storage and signals. Inns tucked into hills carried on the habit of quiet exchange. Knights, stripped of their mantles, found work as mercenaries or protectors, their vows unspoken yet alive in conduct. Why Scotland? Because it stood on the edge of Europe's map, too distant for papal power to reach fully, too divided for kings to enforce uniform rule. In the cracks, silence lived, and in silence, survival. Legends stretch this survival into fantasy ships arriving with treasure, secret lodges meeting by moonlight, codes carved in every stone. The truth is likely simpler. Fragments endured, practices carried forward, vows remembered in smaller ways. Yet in simplicity lies strength. For a vow whispered in a Scottish valley could outlast a decree shouted in Paris. So Scotland's shadow matters not as proof of treasure, but as proof of continuity. The order did not die completely. It slipped north into hills and villages, into stone and memory. And there, in shadow, it waited, not to rise again in cloaks and swords, but to feed whispers and traditions that shaped centuries of hidden brotherhoods. On a hill near Edinburgh stands Rosslyn Chapel, a structure of stone more intricate than most cathedrals. Its walls are alive with carvings, angels, vines, geometric knots, figures playing instruments, stars aligned in patterns. Tourists marvel, scholars debate, legends multiply. Many whisper that Rosslyn holds the last voice of the Templars. The chapel was built long after the order's official fall by the Sinclair family, whose ties to Templar legends run deep. The Sinclairs supported Robert the Bruce, sheltered knights in Scotland, and may have absorbed fragments of their practices. In Rosslyn, those fragments seem carved into stone. Among the carvings are symbols that echo Templar marks elsewhere, crosses with unusual tilt, sequences of cubes and circles that resemble ciphers, plants depicted that were unknown in Europe at the time, such as maize, sparking theories of voyages across the Atlantic. Some carvings align with constellations, as if the chapel itself were map and compass. But Rosslyn is not only about symbols, it is about memory. To build such a place required not just wealth but purpose. The builders seemed intent on preserving knowledge, not in books, which burn, but in stone, which endures. Every pillar, every arch, every figure seems to speak, if only one knows the language. What did they whisper? Perhaps not treasure, but instruction. The chapel may be less vault than mnemonic. Like the Templar habit of carving signals into stone, Rosslyn could be a grand expansion, a memory palace carved into reality. Those who walked its aisles could recall stories, lessons, routes, rituals. Of course, legend stretches further. Some claim the Holy Grail lies beneath, hidden in crypts sealed by stone. Others say scrolls from the Temple Mount rest in chambers below. Excavations have found chambers indeed, but sealed and unopened, their silence feeding myth. Whether they hold relics or simply earth, the mystery endures because the chapel itself invites it. Rosslyn whispers because it is unfinished. Some carvings trail off, incomplete. Some arches seem to lead nowhere. It is as if the builders began a sentence in stone and left it hanging, daring future generations to complete it. This unfinished quality keeps the mystery alive, like a code without key, like a song missing its final note. So what is Rosslyn? A chapel of worship, yes. A work of art, certainly. But also a vessel of memory. Perhaps the last visible echo of a brotherhood that chose stone over parchment, whisper over proclamation. To stand within its walls is to feel silence pressing. Every carving seems to watch, to wait, to hint. The whisper is not loud, but steady. It says, knowledge survives not in treasure chests, but in forms that hide as beauty. Look closer, and beauty becomes code. Rosslyn remains because whispers outlast shouts. Kings shouted, the church decreed, yet centuries later those voices are dust. The chapel still stands, whispering through stone, carrying fragments of a language that once bound knights across continents. And though the language is half forgotten, the whisper continues, waiting for those willing to listen. People imagine treasure as glittering coins piled high in secret vaults. They picture chalices lined with gems, golden crowns buried beneath chapels, caskets filled with jewels. For the Templars, treasure looked very different. Their wealth was not just gold, it was grain. It was timber. It was wool and salt, barrels of wine, herds of cattle. Their fortune rested not on shiny metal, but on what people needed to survive. The order learned early that gold was too heavy to move, too obvious to hide, too dangerous to carry across a continent. But a wagon full of grain, a shipment of timber, a herd of sheep grazing in the fields, these passed without suspicion, and yet these were worth more than gold in the right time and place. A castle cannot stand without wood, an army cannot march without bread, a ship cannot sail without tar and rope. The Templars saw what kings overlooked, that real power comes not from piles of coins, but from controlling supply. They owned mills that ground grain into flour. They owned vineyards whose barrels stocked ships. They owned flocks whose wool clothed soldiers in winter. To the outside eye, they were farmers and merchants. To those who understood, they were rulers of the essentials. This strategy also made them invisible. A king counting his coffers saw only gold. He might seize coins, but overlook barns filled with wheat. He might tax chests of silver, but ignore pastures where herds multiplied quietly. The order scattered its wealth across ordinary landscapes, disguising value as daily life. Gold that wasn't gold also travelled further. A barrel of wine could be sold in one port, converted into coin, then used to buy wool elsewhere. Wool could be sold for grain. Grain could be exchanged for timber. Each transformation disguised the original value, making it harder to trace, harder to seize. By the time a king's men demanded payment, the wealth had already shifted forms 3 times, scattered across markets. Merchants admired this. They trusted the Templars because the order thought like them, not like kings. The knights did not hoard, they cycled. They moved goods where they were needed most, creating both profit and loyalty. A village that sold its grain to the temple knew it would receive wool or salt in return. A ship that carried Templar cargo knew it would not sail empty. The church accused them of greed, but the truth was simpler. They understood that survival lay in control of essentials. They could lose gold to raids, but they could not lose the harvest once it fed their allies. They could be accused of heresy, but farmers remembered who bought their crops fairly, who stored food that saved them in harsh winters. This is why, when arrests came, the expected treasure was not found. Kings searched for chests of coins, vaults lined with gold. They found little. The treasure was already eaten, already worn, already sailed away. It was not hoarded but moving, alive, circulating through Europe's veins. To this day, legends of Templar treasure persist. People dig under chapels, search caves, scan coastlines for lost chests. They look for gold that never existed in the form they imagine. The true treasure was never static. It was dynamic grain in barns, cattle in fields, ships loaded with wine. Gold that wasn't gold, but sustenance, trade, and influence. That is why the order was feared. Gold is easy to steal, but control of bread, control of timber, control of salt, that is control of life itself. Kings envied them, not because they had gold, but because they had what gold could not always buy, necessity. And so the greatest treasure of the Templars remains misunderstood. It was not piles of coin locked in a vault. It was the invisible wealth of ordinary things, moved with quiet precision, disguised as daily life. A treasure that could not be seized because it was already in use, already feeding, building, sailing, living. Gold. That wasn't gold, but power all the same. In an age without passports, without printed documents, without banks in every town, trust was fragile. A man on the road might be anyone: merchant, bandit, messenger, spy. The Templars solved this with seals and passwords. Simple tools, yet powerful enough to span continents. The seal was more than wax pressed with a symbol. It was identity. Every commandery had one, each slightly different. The image of 2 knights riding one horse, the red cross, a castle, a sword, each mark carried authority. A parchment sealed with it was trusted as if it were the voice of the order itself. No king's men dared break one lightly, for to do so meant declaring war on a network that reached far beyond his border. But seals were fragile too. Wax could be copied, impressions faked. The order added another layer: passwords. These were not long phrases or complex codes. They were simple, direct, easy to remember under stress. A single word, sometimes a line from scripture, sometimes a phrase that sounded ordinary but carried meaning when spoken in the right place. A knight arriving at a commandery might be asked a question. What do you seek? His answer, if correct, would open doors. If wrong, he would be turned away or watched closely. In markets, a phrase about bread or salt might unlock access to hidden goods. In taverns, a line of psalm might confirm identity. The genius of this system was its humility. It did not rely on elaborate encryption, only on trust and memory. A seal on a parchment confirmed the message. A password confirmed the man. Together, they created a chain of verification strong enough to span from London to Acre. Seals also carried intimidation. Villagers, seeing one on a parchment, knew the order stood behind it. Merchants trusted it more than a king's promise, because they knew the Templars kept their word. A seal turned a scrap of parchment into currency, into guarantee, into shield. Passwords ensured survival. If a messenger was caught, he carried no map, no list, no treasure, only a phrase in his mind. If he resisted, the knowledge died with him. If he spoke it in the right place, doors opened, goods moved, information flowed. The church later twisted this. They accused the knights of secret words, of hidden rituals, of passwords whispered in the dark as heresy. But the truth was practical. Passwords were not blasphemy, they were logistics. They ensured that men on the road could trust one another, that messages were not forged, that supplies moved safely. Even now, the habit endures. Modern systems of authentication signatures, stamps, codes, carry the same principle. A seal plus a password equals trust. The Templars mastered this long before ink met printing press. So when we picture their secrecy, we must remember it was not mystical. It was practical. Wax and word. Mark and phrase. Enough to build trust where trust was fragile. Enough to hold a network together across mountains, seas, and kingdoms. The real treasure of the Templars was not gold or relics. It was this, a system of trust, forged in wax and memory, simple yet unbreakable. Seals and passwords, small things that built an empire of movement, invisible yet enduring. The Templars did not stand alone. Their story is not one of knights against the world, but of constant negotiation. Enemies, allies, and rent, that was the triangle in which they lived. Enemies were obvious. Saracens in the Holy Land, rival orders, kings who envied their wealth. But enemies at times became allies, and allies became enemies. The order fought Muslims in battle, yet at times traded with them quietly, moving goods across contested borders. They clashed with kings, yet also funded their wars. They served the Pope, yet sometimes resisted his decrees. The lines were never simple. Allies came in forms both great and small. Peasants who sold grain, innkeepers who offered rooms, merchants who trusted their seals. Without these allies, the network collapsed. Kings may have seen the Templars as rivals, but common people often saw them as reliable partners. Bread bought fairly, debts honoured, roads kept safe. These earned loyalty that outlived decrees. Rent tied it all together. The order owned vast lands, but much of it was leased. Villagers farmed fields in exchange for rent. Merchants used mills and paid dues. This system spread their influence without constant presence. Even when knights were scarce, their income flowed. Rent turned land into lifeblood, fueling ships, armour, and bread. Enemies, allies, and rent formed a delicate balance. Too much pressure from enemies, and the system faltered. Too little care for allies, and loyalty evaporated. Mismanagement of rent and income dried up. The Templars succeeded because they balanced all three with discipline. Their downfall came when balance broke. Enemies grew louder kings hungry for gold, priests fearful of independence. Allies shrank silent, unwilling to risk standing beside accused heretics. Rent, once steady, became excuse for seizure, as lands were confiscated under royal order. Yet, for nearly 2 centuries, this triangle sustained them. They survived not because of miracles, but because they understood relationships. Enemies could be fought, Allies could be cultivated, rent could be managed. Kings may have worn crowns, but the Templars wore discipline. Their story reminds us that power is not only about swords. It is about networks of trust and obligation. Enemies test them, allies sustain them, rent funds them, remove one corner, and the triangle falls. For the Templars, it fell on a Friday morning in 1307. But until then, it held strong, carried by discipline, silence, and the understanding that power lies not in gold alone, but in the bonds between people. When kings seized castles and burned parchment, they believed they had severed the veins of the order, but the true veins were not inside walls or ink. They stretched across hills and rivers, roads built not of stone but of memory. Even after the fall, these ghost roads of Europe remained alive, guiding those who remembered. A ghost road was not always visible. Sometimes it was nothing more than a line of shrines along a valley, each marking the distance to the next safe haven. Sometimes it was a path carved into forest earth, disguised as a hunting trail, yet running straight between commanderies. Sometimes it was hidden in plain sight, the very pilgrim roads walked by thousands, with small diversions only brothers knew. These roads carried more than men, they carried knowledge. A rider could leave Paris with a phrase, a tally, or even just a memory, and within weeks it reached Rome, Lisbon, or Acre. The trick was not speed alone. The trick was invisibility. By walking roads pilgrims already walked, the Templars hid their network inside faith itself. Every crossroad shrine, every chapel on a hill, every inn filled with pilgrims was also a node in their silent system. Even when the order fell, these roads did not vanish. Farmers still used the shrines. Inns still opened their doors. Chapels still stood at crossroads. The meaning changed, but the structures endured. In some villages, children carried lanterns along routes they no longer understood, a remnant of signals once meant to guide knights. Archaeologists today still stumble upon curious alignments. Chapels built at exact intervals, wells dug at distances too precise to be coincidence, grooves in stone where horses once walked again and again. These are the footprints of ghost roads, lines across Europe carved not in ink but in habit. Why do they matter? Because they reveal how the order survived in fragments. A king can seize land. He cannot erase the memory of a road. A pope can condemn men. He cannot move a shrine set in stone. The network was not just castles and gold. It was geography, turned into living code. Legends say these ghost roads later fed into guilds and secret brotherhoods. Masons used them to connect sites. Merchants followed them to safe markets. Some even say rebels and reformers used them centuries later, retracing steps of a hidden infrastructure. Whether true or not, the possibility endures, because the roads themselves endured. A ghost road is not only a path, it is a story layered into earth. To walk one is to trace the memory of discipline, of vows whispered and carried across miles. And though no Templar riders travel them now, the lines remain, silent yet present, waiting under the dust of Europe's fields and forests. The order may have fallen, but their roads became ghosts. And ghosts, unlike men, cannot be chained. The trials of the Templars were not fought only in dungeons. They were fought in the papal court, in chambers heavy with incense, where politics weighed more than faith. Here, blood was not spilled on stone floors, but on parchment, each decision cutting as deep as any blade. The Pope of the time, Clement V, walked a narrow road. He owed his throne to King Philip IV of France, who demanded the order's destruction. Yet Clement knew the charges were thin, the confessions broken by torture, the evidence contradictory. He knew the Templars had served the Church faithfully for 2 centuries. He knew erasing them meant cutting away a part of Christendom's strength. But he also knew that to resist Philip was to risk losing his own seat, perhaps even his life. So the papal court became a place of slow bleeding. Each decision drained the order further, not with swords but with decrees. Bulls were written that suspended, then dissolved, then transferred lands. At every stage, Clement hesitated, tried to stall, tried to soften. But Philip pressed harder, his influence choking the court, cardinals argued. Some insisted the knights were guilty, others defended them. But the louder voice was always the king's. In whispers, clerks admitted doubt. Yet the records show how doubt bent beneath pressure. The papal bulls read like confessions of their own documents, of compromise, of survival under a crown's shadow. The blood in the papal court was metaphorical, but no less real. Thousands of lives depended on each parchment sealed. Entire networks rose or fell with each decree, and though Clement granted absolution in secret at Chinon, he allowed the louder narrative of guilt to dominate. He became both protector and executioner, a pope torn between truth and survival. This chapter reveals a truth often forgotten. The Church was not a single voice. It was many voices, some silenced, some shouted down, some hidden in vaults for centuries. The Templars' fate was not decided by divine revelation, but by politics, by fear, by the pressure of a king who saw debt as heresy. The papal court bled them slowly, each decree another wound. And though swords and flames ended lives, it was ink that ended the order. That is why their story lingers as tragedy not only of knights betrayed, but of a church that traded truth for survival, letting blood spill in silence. The accusations still echo, spitting on the cross, denying Christ, worshipping strange idols, kissing men in secret rites. These were the charges laid against the Templars, charges that shocked villagers and justified seizures. But were they heresy or camouflage? Consider their vows. Silence was central, obedience was unquestioned. Poverty meant no personal possessions. In such an order, rituals would naturally take forms outsiders could not understand. A symbolic gesture might look like denial. A whispered word might sound like blasphemy. What if these acts were never heresy, but signals? What if what the Church saw as sin was in fact code? Spitting on the cross, for example. Could it have been a test of loyalty? A way to prove that a knight valued the brotherhood above symbols, ready to endure suspicion without breaking trust? Or perhaps it was a misinterpretation of a ritual meant to symbolize contempt for sin, not for Christ. The worship of a head, described by some as metal, by others as bone, could it have been a relic, a saint's skull, or even a symbolic object used as focus for unity? In a world of relic veneration, this was not strange. But under the eye of enemies, it was painted as idolatry. The secret kisses, accused as depravity, could have been signs of peace, like those exchanged in churches even today. But in dark chambers, under torture's pressure, these became twisted into evidence of forbidden acts. Heresy was the easiest charge to weaponize. It required no proof, only suspicion. A villager hearing such tales would turn from the order in horror. A king could point to these charges and declare that his seizures were holy, not greedy. The Church could distance itself, claiming it defended faith against corruption. But when read closely, the accusations do not hold together. Too many contradictions, too many differences. If they were true, the rituals would be consistent. Instead, they vary wildly, as if each confession was shaped by the questioner's imagination. This suggests less a hidden cult, and more a system of camouflage gestures, words, practices misunderstood, or deliberately twisted. Camouflage was always the Templar way. They hid messages in prayers, signals in stone, codes in cloaks. To those inside, these were survival. To those outside, they were suspicious. Heresy, then, may not have been their crime, but their cover. They were accused of secrecy because secrecy was their shield. The question remains unanswered because they left no written defense. Their silence was both protection and curse. Protection because it kept their true systems hidden, curse because it allowed their enemies to define them. To this day, we cannot say with certainty what their rituals meant. Were they acts of faith, acts of discipline, acts of camouflage? Perhaps all three. What endures is the lesson. Secrecy invites suspicion. The Templars built a network strong because it was hidden. But when light shone on it, that very secrecy became evidence of guilt. Heresy or camouflage the line blurred, and in that blur, kings and popes found the excuse they needed to erase an order too powerful to control. The courtyard was silent, except for the crackle of wood. The dawn air carried the smell of smoke mixed with damp stone. A crowd had gathered: peasants, merchants, priests, soldiers, faces pressed close, eyes fixed on the men who once wore white mantles with red crosses. Now they wore chains. At the centre stood Jacques de Molay, the last Grand Master of the Order, his beard long, his posture unbroken. Beside him, other brothers waited, bound, their eyes fixed not on the crowd but on the sky. For years they had been imprisoned, questioned, tortured. Now their fate was flame. The charges were read aloud, the same words that had echoed through courts and chambers. Heresy, idolatry, secret rites. Few in the crowd believed them fully, yet the spectacle was stronger than truth. To see a man burned was to see the power of crown and cross. Kings needed this moment, and priests justified it with holy words. The stake was not about guilt, it was about demonstration. Molay was offered mercy if he confessed again, but he had already confessed under pain, then recanted when the torture stopped. Now, at the edge of death, he refused. Witnesses later claimed he spoke words that still echo, that the king would soon answer before God, that the Pope too would be judged. Within a year, both were dead. The prophecy became legend. The fire consumed him slowly. Chains rattled, voices prayed, smoke rose. To some, it was a martyrdom, to others, a curse. To the men holding torches, it was obedience. Yet even as his body turned to ash, the discipline of silence remained. No secret spilled, no treasure revealed, no network betrayed. The fire at the stake was meant to end the order. Instead, it transformed them. A knight dying in battle is forgotten. A knight burning for silence becomes immortal in story. From that day, the Templars ceased to be soldiers of Christ and became shadows of myth. The flames did more than kill. They created memory. Children whispered of the curse of Molay. Merchants repeated tales of treasure still hidden. Peasants wondered if the knights had truly sinned, or if kings had betrayed them. The order's secrecy, once weapon, now became legend. The stake was final in one sense. The Grand Master was gone, the leadership broken, the papal decree signed. Yet it was also the beginning of something else. Myths outlive fire, stories carry further than ashes. And in those stories, the Templars became larger than life, their silence more powerful than any confession. So the fire at the stake was not only destruction, it was transformation. The order left flesh and entered legend. And legends, unlike men, cannot be burned. After the fall, the knights disappeared from fields and castles, but their habits did not vanish. They bled into other communities, absorbed by guilds of builders, masons, and craftsmen. These were men who already worked with stone, who already kept secrets, who already trusted symbols over words. The Templar way found a natural home there. Guilds had long traditions of silence, protecting trade secrets and techniques. They built cathedrals, bridges, fortresses. Their work required discipline, trust, and codes of communication. When men of the temple joined them, they carried new habits, carved symbols used as signals, simple codes whispered as passwords, rituals of initiation that tested loyalty. The guilds did not invent these alone. They inherited fragments from knights who could no longer wear cloaks but still carried vows in their bones. Stone became the new parchment. Marks scratched into blocks told masons where to place them, but some marks carried layered meaning: a tilted cross, a sequence of lines, a circle inside a square. To outsiders, these were masons' marks. To insiders, they were also echoes of a language once spoken by warriors. The rituals of guilds grew more elaborate. Apprentices were tested not only in craft but in loyalty. Oaths were sworn not unlike the vows once whispered in commanderies. Symbols carved into lodges resembled patterns seen in chapels tied to the order. Over generations, these fragments grew into traditions that outlived their origin, becoming foundations of fraternities that would spread worldwide. Whispers say the Freemasons inherited directly from the Templars. Historians argue, debating gaps and missing links. But the similarities are undeniable. Secrecy, symbols, oaths. A brotherhood bound by ritual, not by blood. The Templar spirit may not have survived as an institution, but it seeped into guilds, becoming a current beneath the visible stream of history. Why stone guilds? Because stone endures. Just as the knights trusted stone for signals, the masons trusted it for craft. Stone became the bridge between warrior and builder, between vow and craft, between secrecy and survival. A knight stripped of sword could still carve symbols into rock. A mason could still pass them on. This blending also explains why legends of the Templars never fully died. Builders carried whispers across generations. They told stories of knights who vanished, of treasure hidden, of secrets buried in chapels. Whether true or not, the act of telling preserved the memory. The guilds became vessels of myth as much as craft. So the whispers in stone guilds matter not because they prove continuity, but because they show transformation. The Templars survived not as armies, but as influence, absorbed into hands that shaped cathedrals, carved symbols, swore oaths. The line may be blurred, but the whispers remain, carved into stone, carried in ritual, alive in memory. When knights could no longer ride openly, when their commanderies were seized, when their banners were torn down, they turned inward. They became map makers of memory. Without parchment, without authority, they carried their knowledge inside, preserving it like flame cupped against wind. These men knew roads, rivers, and coasts better than most kings. They had memorized routes from Paris to Acre, from Lisbon to Rome, from Scotland to the Levant. They had walked them, guarded them, hidden supplies along them. When the order fell, they did not forget. They held the maps inside, invisible, untraceable, immune to seizure. This memory was more than geography. It was practice. They remembered how to move wealth without carrying it, how to carve signals into stone, how to test loyalty with simple words. They remembered how to trust the compass when others feared it, how to read the stars, how to disguise treasure as grain. These were the true maps, the methods that turned chaos into system. Some of these men blended into villages. They became farmers, but farmers who knew how to organize harvests into surplus. They became merchants, but merchants who knew how to move goods invisibly. They became masons, but masons who remembered signals carved into chapels. In each role, fragments of memory survived. Generations later, those fragments reappeared in guild rituals, in whispered legends, in symbols carved where no one remembered their meaning. Memory became tradition, stripped of origin yet alive. A compass rose carved into stone, a sequence of numbers in a ledger, a ritual of initiation that tested silence. These were maps, but not of land. Maps of knowledge, carried through time. The map-makers of memory did not seek glory. They sought survival. They knew their order had ended, but they also knew knowledge could not be burned if carried inside. Each man became a living archive, a fragment of a system scattered across Europe. That is why Templar legends endure, not because treasure survived in vaults, but because memory survived in men. Those men passed fragments onward, sometimes knowingly, sometimes unknowingly, until the fragments reassembled into myths, into guilds, into whispers that still ripple today. The real map is not parchment hidden under stone. It is memory, handed down in habits, rituals, symbols and stories. A map without lines, without ink, yet powerful enough to guide centuries. The Templars may have lost their banners, but they became cartographers of silence. Their maps were not of places, but of survival. And in that survival, they ensured that though kings and popes erased their name, the memory of their system would never truly vanish. The night Jacques de Molay was tied to the stake, Paris held its breath. Torches flickered in the hands of soldiers, smoke rose in spirals, and the crowd pressed close to witness the death of a man once feared and respected. Fire ate the wood, climbed the ropes, and licked the flesh of the last Grand Master of the Temple. Yet, it was not the flames that lingered, it was his voice. Accounts differ in detail, but all agree he spoke with clarity even as fire consumed him. He cursed King Philip IV of France and Pope Clement V, declaring that within a year both would stand before God to answer for their betrayal. It was not a cry of pain but of judgment, a prophecy hurled into the night. And then the flames swallowed him whole. The curse spread faster than fire. Whispers carried it through streets, through markets, through villages. And when, within months, Clement lay dead and Philip followed, people remembered. The curse became proof that the order had not died in silence. Their Grand Master had spoken, and heaven itself had answered. Fear took root. Nobles who had profited from seized Templar lands looked over their shoulders. Priests who had condemned the knights hesitated before altars. The deaths of Pope and King were coincidence, perhaps. Illness and fate strike all men. But in the minds of the people, coincidence became destiny. The Templars had not only been betrayed, they had been avenged. The curse grew with time. Later kings suffered misfortunes. Dynasties collapsed. Wars ravaged France. Chroniclers traced each back to the flames in Paris, claiming the Temple's vengeance never ceased. A dynasty cursed, a nation doomed, all because one night called judgment in fire. But was it curse or memory? Perhaps the words mattered less than the fear they created. Kings after Philip ruled under the shadow of his fate. Every failure seemed proof of divine punishment. Every setback reminded them of the order's silence and strength. The curse lived not only in heaven but in the minds of men, shaping decisions, breeding unease, haunting thrones. For centuries, the curse became part of France's story. It transformed the Templars from accused heretics into avengers. The fire meant to erase them instead crowned them with myth. A man tied to a stake became judge over kings and popes. His silence in torture, his voice in death, both outlived his body. Legends of the curse endure, because they speak to justice denied. People saw knights betrayed by greed and politics, and they longed for balance. The curse gave them that balance. It turned tragedy into vengeance, erasure into memory, silence into thunder. Whether true or not, the curse ensured the order never fully died. It became a story stronger than gold, stronger than swords, stronger even than fire, a curse that followed, not because heaven decreed it, but because people believed it. And belief, like silence, is a power no king can burn. After the flames cooled and the ashes settled, it seemed the order was gone. Lands seized, leaders executed, houses broken. But the story did not end there. From ashes, legend rose. And legend proved more enduring than any fortress. The Templars became larger in absence than they had been in presence. Villagers who once saw them as distant lords now spoke of them as guardians wronged. Merchants whispered of treasure hidden before the arrests. Sailors told of ships vanishing into the Atlantic. Masons carved symbols into stone, said to carry secrets of the fallen order. Farmers claimed barns still held supplies once marked by the Red Cross. The absence invited imagination. Without documents, without answers, people filled silence with stories. A buried chest here, a hidden scroll there, a ship appearing in mist, a knight riding by night. The order became a canvas for fear and hope alike. Legends gave the Templars power long after their fall. Kings who destroyed them could not destroy the myths. Every strange carving in a chapel, every unexplained ruin, every tale of buried wealth fed the idea that the Templars still lived in shadow. Some believed they survived in Scotland, others in Portugal, others across the ocean in lands unknown. The myths also transformed them. No longer bound by the politics of the 13th century, the Templars became symbols. To some, they were martyrs of faith, to others, keepers of forbidden knowledge. To rebels, they were proof that power could defy crowns. To dreamers, they were seekers of relics and mysteries. From ashes to legend, they passed into imagination. And imagination is harder to kill than men. A man's body burns in minutes. A legend grows for centuries. That is why, even today, their name stirs curiosity. Even today, their symbols appear in stories, books, films. Even today, people dig under ruins, convinced the order hid treasure there. The legend also reshaped their memory. What was once disciplined seals, passwords, supply lines became mystery. What was once practicality, grain, ships, roads, became myth of lost gold and secret vaults. The truth faded, replaced by stories more colourful, more enduring. Yet inside those stories lie fragments of reality, distorted but not erased. From ashes, legend rose. And legend carried them further than they ever marched in life. Centuries have passed since the cloaks burned and the banners fell. Yet the Knights Templar remain alive not as men, but as symbol. They became immortal not by surviving in flesh, but by surviving in story. Their name is invoked in whispers and in boasts, in myths of buried treasure, in tales of secret brotherhoods, in symbols carved on stone. They became a bridge between past and present, their silence feeding imagination, their discipline shaping traditions that claim descent from their vows. The immortal order does not ride horses or guard pilgrims. It rides through legend, guarding memory. It is found in guild rituals that echo their codes, in stories of curses that haunt kings, in chapels carved with symbols that invite endless interpretation. In the fascination of generations who refuse to let them rest. Why do they endure? Because they embody contradiction. Soldiers of faith accused of heresy, guardians of treasure said to hide treasure. Men of silence, whose silence became thunder. Destroyed by kings, yet remembered by people. Each contradiction makes them compelling, unresolvable, immortal. The immortal order is not about whether they survived secretly. It is about how they survived in memory. Burned in Paris, but alive in whispers. Dissolved by decree, but alive in legend. Forgotten in official history, but alive in imagination. That is, immortality beyond blood, beyond banners, beyond time. As long as people tell stories of justice betrayed, of secrets hidden, of power challenged, the Templars will return. Not as knights in armour, but as symbols in mind. The immortal order rides not on horses, but on memory, carrying a legacy that kings tried to erase, but could not. Their treasure was never gold. It was silence, discipline, memory. And those cannot be burned. That is why, though centuries have passed, their name endures. The Knights Templar remain the immortal order, unbroken in death, alive in legend, carried forever in the minds of those who still whisper their name. Long after the trials, long after the fires, a different kind of journey began to surface in whispers. It was said the Templars had not only guarded pilgrims to Jerusalem, but created pilgrimages of their own, not to holy shrines everyone knew, but to places invisible to outsiders, places where the order stored its knowledge. These journeys became known in whispers as the secret pilgrimage. Unlike the pilgrimages of common folk, which ended at cathedrals and relics, these paths led to hidden chapels, underground chambers, forgotten groves. They were not marked on maps, but remembered in signals, carved into stone lintels, whispered in passwords. A knight who had survived the fall could retrace these routes to find allies, hidden resources, or reminders of vows once sworn. Some spoke of pilgrimages that stretched from one edge of Europe to the other, from Portugal to the highlands of Scotland, from Rome to remote valleys in the Alps. Each stop was a waypoint, carrying not treasure, but continuity. A carved cross, half buried in moss. A pattern of stars painted on a chapel ceiling. A relic hidden not for worship, but for memory. Why did they walk these roads after their fall? Because pilgrimage had always been part of their duty. To walk was to reaffirm silence, to retrace steps of the brotherhood, to remind themselves that while the world called them heretics, their path remained sacred. It was not about reaching Jerusalem anymore. It was about reaching the hidden Jerusalem within the order that lived in memory and oath. Travellers who crossed paths with these wandering men often mistook them for common pilgrims. Simple cloaks, worn boots, wooden staffs. Yet their steps were too purposeful, their eyes too steady. They spoke little, but when they did, it was with certainty. They asked for water, for bread, and sometimes for directions to a chapel most had forgotten existed. Then they moved on, vanishing down roads like ghosts. These pilgrimages stitched together the fragments left after dissolution. They carried messages. One brother might walk from village to village, carrying nothing more than a prayer on his lips. Yet in one shrine he would meet another, exchange a word, pass on knowledge. To outsiders, it looked like chance encounter. To them, it was part of the map of survival. The secret pilgrimage also became legend among villagers. Stories spread of mysterious travellers who healed the sick, blessed crops, or warned of storms. Some believed they were angels, others said cursed monks. But the truth was simpler. They were remnants of the temple, still walking, still carrying the order within them. To this day, scholars debate whether such pilgrimages truly happened, or whether they were later invention. Yet the traces remain. Odd chapels far from main roads with crosses carved in strange places. Stones that seem to mark routes no one remembers. Villages where old tales speak of mysterious strangers blessing fields. The secret pilgrimage shows us that survival is not always loud. Sometimes it is a man walking a road alone, carrying silence like armour, memory like treasure, and leaving behind only whispers. And though we may never fully trace those paths, we sense them still in the stones, in the stories, in the echoes of footsteps that walked not for relics, but for remembrance. When swords were taken and banners destroyed, the Templars still had one weapon left, the written word, not the public kind, not chronicles in libraries or decrees sealed with wax. Their power now rested in hidden scripts, writing designed not to be read easily, but to protect what only brothers were meant to know. Some of these scripts were simple substitutions, letters replaced with numbers, numbers replaced with symbols. Others were far more complex, weaving prayers into patterns where every third word or every second line carried meaning. To the untrained eye, it was a hymn. To the brother who knew the key, it was instruction. Stone carried these scripts too. Marks carved into walls, lines etched onto gravestones, symbols hidden in cathedral corners, circles within triangles, crosses tilted against geometry. The average pilgrim thought them decoration. A brother saw a direction, a location, a name. Why did they hide knowledge this way? Because parchment burns. Stone endures, because kings could seize scrolls but not understand carvings. Because the church could read words, but not symbols, disguised as ornament. The hidden script was camouflage, memory encoded into the very fabric of Europe's buildings. In later centuries, masons and guildsmen repeated these marks without knowing origin. They became tradition, ritual, habit, yet some still carried meaning. A particular carving in one chapel might point to another, far away. Together, they formed a chain, a map written in symbols scattered across the continent. There are stories of cryptic manuscripts surfacing centuries later, filled with symbols no one could decipher. Some scholars believe they are remnants of this hidden script, fragments of the Order's survival encoded in ways we still do not understand. Each page, each carving, is a locked door waiting for a key long forgotten. But the hidden script was not only about secrecy, it was also about discipline. To write in such a way required patience, care, and silence. A brother learned to carry words inside him, to carve meaning without drawing attention, to trust that what he encoded might outlive him by centuries. Perhaps this is why their story continues to fascinate. Because somewhere, scattered in stone and ink, fragments of their hidden script may still wait. In chapels visited by tourists, in villages no one studies, in manuscripts gathering dust in forgotten libraries. Each symbol might be echo, or it might be instruction. The hidden script reminds us that knowledge is never fully erased. It hides, it shifts, it disguises itself. But like seeds under earth, it waits for those who know how to look, and the Templars, masters of silence, ensured their knowledge was never gone, only hidden. Centuries have passed. Kings who destroyed the order lie forgotten in their tombs. Popes who condemned them are names in dusty records. Yet the Templars remain, not as armies, not as rulers of land, but as an idea. What remains unbroken is not their castles or their banners. It is their presence in memory, in myth, in symbols that refuse to fade. What remains unbroken is discipline. The vow of silence that carried their secrets past torture still carries their mystery today. We may not know all they guarded, but we know they guarded it with unshakable resolve. That discipline, unbroken, is what turned them from knights into legend. What remains unbroken is their network, not in roads and ships as once, but in memory scattered across Europe's stone and story. Chapels still stand, carvings still whisper, villages still tell tales of strangers who came at night, left blessings, and vanished. The network outlived the men because it was never just material. It was woven into culture itself. What remains unbroken is fascination. People dig for treasure, write books, spin tales, create orders in their name. Some chase gold, others chase truth. But all are pulled by the same force, the sense that something of the order still lives, unbroken, waiting to be found. Perhaps that is the greatest legacy. Not relics, not scrolls, not ships, but curiosity, the order left behind a silence so strong that centuries of voices cannot fill it. That silence calls us still. It asks what they knew, what they hid, what they carried from one world into another. What remains unbroken is this: they became immortal not by surviving in body, but by surviving in wonder. As long as people ask questions, as long as they walk into chapels and see strange carvings, as long as they hear the story of fire and curse, the Templars remain. The Church tried to erase them. Kings tried to seize them. Fire tried to consume them. Yet silence endured, memory endured, legend endured. The order may be gone, but what they built, the sense of hidden truth, of power carried in secrecy, of vows stronger than death, remains unbroken. And so the story does not end with ashes. It ends with the realization that the Templars are not only past, they are present, in myths, in symbols, in questions we still ask. They are unbroken because they live where no decree can reach inside imagination, inside curiosity, inside the enduring belief that somewhere their secret still waits. When the order was broken in France, when fires lit the night sky and chains rattled in dark chambers, the story should have ended. But in harbours along the western coasts, something else stirred. Ships were seen slipping out under moonlight, sails dark against the stars, cargo heavy but unmarked. Whispers spread that not all of the Templar fleet had been seized. Some said entire squadrons vanished into the Atlantic, leaving behind only rumours and empty docks. The records speak of ships unaccounted for at La Rochelle, one of the Order's great ports. The king's men searched, but they found fewer vessels than expected. Some believed the fleet had scattered to friendly ports in Portugal or Scotland. Others said they sailed further beyond maps, beyond known waters, into the vast ocean that terrified most of Europe. The Atlantic was feared in those days. Men believed monsters lurked there, that ships would fall off the edge of the world. Yet the Templars had knowledge others lacked. They studied currents, read stars, trusted compasses. They moved with discipline where others hesitated. For them, the ocean was not abyss but path. Legends say the fleet carried treasure, gold, relics, scrolls from the Temple Mount itself. Some claim they sailed west to bury it in islands unknown, securing it beyond reach of kings. Others believe the treasure was not physical at all, but knowledge maps, charts, methods of navigation. If true, then the Atlantic crossing was not escape but preservation, carrying wisdom into lands untouched by crown or church. In later centuries, when Portuguese and Spanish ships reached the Americas, when maps grew larger and oceans shrank, people looked back at the Templars and wondered, had they been there first? Had their ships touched shores before Columbus or Cabral? The carvings of strange plants in places like Rosslyn Chapel fueled this suspicion. How could such things be known unless voyagers had crossed the Atlantic long before official history recorded it? We cannot prove these legends, but we cannot erase them either. They endure because absence invites imagination. Ships vanish, and in their vanishing they create story. A missing fleet becomes possibility, and possibility, whispered across centuries, grows into legend. The Atlantic crossing represents more than escape. It represents refusal. The Order would not die in chains. They would not hand everything to kings. They would not let their silence be broken by fire alone. Whether they reached islands or vanished in storms, their ships carried defiance, carried memory, carried the idea that even in destruction they chose their own path. Somewhere on that vast ocean, sails may have torn, masts may have snapped, waves may have swallowed hulls whole, but the legend remains afloat. The Templar fleet sailed into silence, and silence became their survival. The Atlantic crossing remains one of history's greatest maybes, a horizon that refuses to close. Few symbols are tied to the Templars more deeply than the Holy Grail. The chalice of Christ, the vessel of divine blood, the cup of eternal life legends wrap it in layers of meaning. And always, the Templars stand close in those stories, guardians of the Grail, keepers of the cup. But where did this bond begin? The earliest tales of the Grail emerged in the same centuries the Templars rose to power. Poets like Chrétien de Troyes wove stories of knights and quests, of mysterious vessels glimpsed in shadowed halls. These were not official histories, but allegories, tales that mixed chivalry with mystery. Yet people saw parallels, a brotherhood of knights sworn to secrecy, guarding relics, moving between worlds of faith and power. It was easy to believe the Grail lay in their hands. What was the Grail to them? If it existed, perhaps it was not a cup at all. Some claim it was knowledge, a scroll or book holding secrets of Christ's bloodline. Others say it was a relic, maybe not the chalice itself, but a vessel tied to early Christians. Some believe it was entirely symbolic, a code for enlightenment, for divine truth hidden from ordinary believers. The Church condemned them partly because of such whispers. To hold the Grail was to hold power that bypassed priests, relics stronger than papal authority. If the Templars possessed it, even symbolically, it explained the fear they inspired. Not only wealth and armies, but something more dangerous, direct access to the sacred. Stories spread that the Grail was hidden when the Order fell. Buried in vaults, carried on ships, sealed in Roslin's crypts, pilgrims swore they saw strange vessels in chapels tied to the temple. Chroniclers hinted at relics never shown to outsiders. Each story deepened the shadow. The Grail was not just lost, it was protected. Yet perhaps the true Grail was the vow itself. A vessel does not need to be wood or metal. It can be silence. It can be discipline. The Templars carried their Grail not in hands but in hearts, a container for knowledge, for faith, for endurance. To outsiders, it became myth. To them, it was lived reality. The Grail endures in shadow, because it was never just an object, it was an idea. And ideas cannot be seized, cannot be burned, cannot be chained. Whether cup or code, scroll or symbol, the Grail lives because the Templars made it part of their silence. They never explained it, they never denied it. And in that silence, the Grail still waits. Centuries pass, empires rise and fall, borders shift, kings die, popes fade. Yet the figure of the Templar remains silent, watchful, enduring. In paintings, in carvings, in stories told by firelight, the knight in white with red cross still stands guard. This is the eternal watch. They are said to guard treasure. They are said to guard the Grail. They are said to guard secrets too vast for ordinary men. But perhaps what they truly guard is memory itself, the memory of vows unbroken, the memory of silence carried to the grave, the memory of men who chose fire over betrayal. The eternal watch is not just legend. It is felt in chapels where carved symbols linger, in guild rituals that echo vows, in villages that still tell tales of mysterious strangers. It is the sense that, though centuries have passed, though history has turned pages, some presence still lingers, not visible, not tangible, but felt. To some, this watch is curse. Kings feared it, believing the Order's shadow judged them, that Molay's curse still lingered over their thrones. To others, it is comfort, the sense that somewhere justice endures, guarded by knights who never abandoned their post. To dreamers, it is invitation. Seek, search, follow the signs. Perhaps the Templars still guard something waiting to be found. But the eternal watch is not about men standing on walls. It is about vigilance inside us. The Templars remind us that silence can be power, that discipline can outlast destruction, that memory is a fortress no king can storm. They show us that to guard an idea is to make it immortal. Their watch continues because we continue to look. Every time we step into a chapel and wonder about carvings, every time we read of treasure and ask, what if? Every time we hear their name and feel curiosity stir, we join the watch. We keep their story alive. The eternal watch is not theirs alone, it is ours too, because as long as we ask, as long as we remember, as long as we wonder, the Templars endure. Not as an army of knights, but as guardians of questions that refuse to die. That is the true secret. They watch not from towers or castles, but from within memory, within imagination. And in that watch, they remain eternal. The last flames died in Paris, but the silence that followed carried further than smoke. That silence was not absence, it was presence. It lingered in markets where men once paid with Templar credit notes. It lingered in chapels where red crosses had been carved into stone. It lingered in the memories of villagers who saw their protectors taken away in chains. Silence became the final weapon of the Order, and it proved sharper than any sword. For centuries, history has leaned on records, parchments, decrees, charters, yet much of what the Templars built was never written. It was carried in discipline, in memory, in ritual. When fire consumed their leaders, the silence of survivors became archive. They spoke little, but by speaking little, they ensured their knowledge was never fully betrayed. Torture demanded confessions, and confessions were given under pain, but the heart of the Order, the way they moved goods unseen, the way they encoded signals, the way they forged trust remained hidden. This silence spread outward like ripples. The church thought it had won. The king thought he had seized everything, but instead they discovered something frustrating. The treasure they expected was not there. Vaults were empty, maps incomplete, accounts missing. They had underestimated the power of silence. The brothers had erased trails, dispersed wealth, disguised memory. Silence had bought them invisibility. Over time, the silence became legend. People filled it with imagination. Where there was no answer, stories grew. Where there was no proof, myths thrived. The silence beyond fire turned absence into mystery, and mystery into immortality. The less we know, the more we ask. The less they said, the more we seek. Even today, the silence echoes. Archaeologists uncover ruins with no explanation. Historians study parchments with missing pages. Tourists walk through chapels and feel something watching. It is the silence of the order, still present, still unanswered. The fire ended lives, but silence outlived fire. Perhaps that was always their plan. A brotherhood built on vows of silence knew the power of withholding. They knew that words can betray, but silence cannot. They knew that kings rule loudly, but silence rules longer. And so, though the fire consumed their bodies, their silence endures. The silence beyond fire is their truest legacy, an echo that still calls us closer, still refuses to break. In the beginning, they were formed to protect pilgrims. In the end, they were destroyed as heretics. Between those points stretched nearly 2 centuries of power, wealth, secrecy, and service. Yet their story does not feel closed. It feels like a circle left open, a line trailing off into the unknown. The order was dissolved, but fragments remained. Lands shifted to other hands, but roads stayed. Ships vanished, but harbours remained. Knowledge was dispersed, but memory survived. The circle never closed because the world could not contain all the paths they had opened. Legends of Scotland, of Portugal, of hidden vaults in the Alps, each adds another arc to the circle. The curse of Malay, the whispers of Rosslyn, the myth of the Grail, each keeps the story in motion. Every new discovery, every new carving uncovered, every new manuscript studied adds another point on the circle, but never the final one. Why does the circle remain open? Because people do not want it closed. A closed circle means the story is over. An open circle means possibility endures. We can imagine fleets sailing west, vaults hidden underground, guilds preserving vows in ritual. We can imagine connections to voyages of discovery, to revolutions, to hidden brotherhoods. The Templars serve as bridge between history and imagination, between what was and what might still be. The open circle also reflects their nature. They were never only warriors. They were bankers, farmers, sailors, builders, navigators, mystics. Their circle touched every part of medieval life, from food in villages to relics in cathedrals. To close that circle would be to erase too much. So it stays open, each fragment hinting at more. In this way, the circle becomes invitation. It calls us to step into the story, to fill gaps with questions, to seek answers in stones and legends. It asks us not to finish it, but to continue it. Every generation adds its own chapter, its own interpretation, its own myths. The circle that never closed ensures the Templars remain alive. Not as an institution, not as soldiers, but as an idea always in motion. As long as the circle remains open, the order endures. History records the order as dissolved, its leaders executed, its lands seized. Yet in every legend, there is one figure who survives, the last guardian. Not a specific man, not a documented name, but an archetype. The image of one knight who carries the memory of the order after all others fall. The last guardian is imagined in many forms. Sometimes he is a knight fleeing with treasure, riding through the night to hide relics before dawn. Sometimes he is an old man in a cloister, teaching guild apprentices symbols without revealing their source. Sometimes he is a wanderer on pilgrim roads, carrying silence as his only companion. He is the embodiment of survival, the one who refuses to let the light go out. Why does this figure endure? Because people need him. We cannot accept that the order ended completely. We want to believe at least one guardian remained, one man who carried the vow forward, who preserved the secret. He represents continuity, the unbroken chain from past to present. The last guardian is not about fact, but about faith. Whether or not he existed does not matter. What matters is the possibility. The possibility that one man walked out of the fire's shadow and into history's silence, carrying something too precious to lose. The possibility that we still feel his presence in myths, in carvings, in whispers of hidden orders. Perhaps the last guardian is not a knight at all. Perhaps the last guardian is us, the people who still remember, who still wonder, who still seek. By telling their story, by keeping their memory alive, we become guardians ourselves. Each listener, each reader, each seeker who keeps asking, ensures the silence is not broken, but continues as living echo. The order fell, but the last guardian walked on. And because of him, or because of us, the story is not finished. The circle remains open. The silence endures. The legend lives. The Templars remain, not in banners or castles, but in questions, in memory, in wonder. The last guardian carries them into eternity. And as long as we listen, as long as we wonder, as long as we ask, we walk beside him still. In the heart of medieval Europe, there were cities that belonged to kings, and there were cities that belonged to God. Yet hidden within those walls, another city existed, one that no charter marked and no chronicler fully described. This was the invisible city of the Templars, a network not of bricks and mortar, but of trust, signs, and hidden knowledge. The keys to that city were never metal. They were words, symbols, gestures, tokens that opened doors no king could see. Imagine a merchant arriving in Paris. To most, the streets are chaos, sellers shouting, wagons creaking, guards patrolling. But to one, trained in the ways of the temple, the city is mapped differently. A carving on a corner stone points toward an inn where allies stay. A chapel window bears a mark that signals safe passage. A phrase whispered at the door of a guild hall secures a room upstairs where money can change hands invisibly. The invisible city lives inside the visible one, its architecture built from memory and vow. These cities existed everywhere. The order had influence. Paris, London, Rome, Lisbon, Acre. Each had its own pattern of signals. Each had its own keepers of keys. A brother could arrive with nothing but a word in his mind, and by sunset he would have food, lodging, and news. Not by chance, not by fortune, but by design. The keys of the invisible city were also practical. They ensured security in a world of spies and thieves. A wrong phrase meant denial. A missing mark meant danger. To be part of the invisible city was to move safely where others stumbled blindly. To kings, the order seemed omnipresent. In truth, it was their network of invisible cities, stitched together by codes and signs, that gave them such reach. When the order fell, those cities did not vanish overnight. Their structures lingered, absorbed by guilds, by merchants, by families who had once been allies. Some say fragments of those invisible cities still exist, layered beneath modern streets. The carvings remain, though their meanings are forgotten. The phrases live in proverbs, stripped of context, but still carrying rhythm. The invisible city faded, but the keys outlasted it. And perhaps that is the greatest lesson. A city built of stone can be razed, but a city built of trust and memory survives. The Templars knew this. They built not only fortresses, but invisible cities, and they carried the keys in silence. Keys no king could seize, no fire could melt. From the moment the order was accused, kings rejoiced at the thought of their downfall. They imagined treasure seized, debts erased, rivals destroyed. Yet, when the ashes cooled, a shadow lingered, a shadow over thrones that no crown could dispel. The shadow was not wealth or power, it was memory. The Templars had been betrayed, and the betrayal left a mark that haunted rulers for generations. Philip IV of France was first to feel it. He had orchestrated the arrests, pressed the Pope, demanded confessions. He believed he had triumphed. Yet within months of Malay's execution, Philip was dead. His sons ruled briefly, but each line ended swiftly, their dynasty collapsing. People whispered of the curse, the vengeance of the temple, a judgment no throne could escape. The shadow had fallen, and it clung to the crown of France. Other rulers feared the same. When seizing Templar lands, they did so cautiously, aware of the stories. Some saw their fortunes falter soon after, their kingdoms thrown into war, famine, or revolt. Chroniclers traced these misfortunes back to the betrayal of the knights. The Templars, though silent, were believed to be watching. Their memory was a judgment that followed rulers like a ghost. The shadow was not only curse but comparison. Kings ruled with pomp and pageantry, yet people remembered the knights who swore poverty and obedience. The contrast shamed rulers. How could they claim holiness while living in luxury, when those they destroyed had served with sacrifice? The shadow became moral weight, a reminder that thrones rested on fragile ground. Even centuries later, the shadow lingered. During revolutions, people recalled the fall of the Templars as proof that kings betrayed trust. During wars, generals invoked their discipline as example. During upheaval, whispers of their curse resurfaced, warning rulers that injustice would not go unanswered. The shadow over thrones is not superstition alone, it is the power of story. A king dies, but a story of betrayal lives. That story weighs heavier than crowns, heavier than scepters. It cannot be silenced, because it belongs not to rulers, but to people. And as long as people remember, the shadow remains. So the Templars, though destroyed, became judges of kings. Their silence became indictment, their ashes became reminder. And every throne since then has sat beneath their shadow, uneasy, aware that betrayal breeds memory, and memory breeds judgment. What in the end is the secret of the Knights Templar? Is it treasure hidden in vaults, ships lost in oceans, relics guarded in stone chapels? Or is it something deeper, something not bound to objects, but to ways of living, ways of remembering, ways of surviving? The secret that survives is not a cup or a scroll, it is silence. The vow that turned defeat into legend. Silence kept knowledge safe from torture, safe from kings, safe from fire. Silence turned the unknown into the mysterious, and the mysterious into the immortal. The secret that survives is trust, a network built not on paper but on loyalty, men who kept faith with each other across seas and continents. Trust that could not be broken by decree, that outlasted kings, that still echoes in the rituals of guilds and brotherhoods. The secret that survives is discipline, an order that combined warrior and monk, sword and prayer, battle and vow. Discipline that made them more than soldiers, more than bankers, more than guardians. Discipline that made them unshakable, even in death. The secret that survives is memory, not recorded in books, but carried in whispers, in stones, in myths. Memory that outlived rulers, that survived erasure, that reached into our present. Memory that continues to ask questions, continues to invite wonder. The Templars did not leave us gold. They left us something harder to measure, harder to seize. They left us the example of men who carried silence as shield, trust as sword, discipline as armour, memory as fortress. That is the secret that survives. It survives because it cannot be destroyed. It survives because it lives not in objects, but in people. It survives because even now, when we hear their name, when we wonder about their fate, when we imagine their ships, their vaults, their curses, we participate in the survival. We keep the secret alive by seeking it. The church tried to erase them. Kings tried to steal from them. Fire tried to consume them. Yet the secret survived, not in treasure, but in legend, not in relics, but in silence, not in history, but in imagination, and so the Templars remain, not as knights in armour, but as guardians of a secret that will never die. The secret is simple, yet eternal, that silence, trust, discipline, and memory are stronger than power, stronger than crowns, stronger than fire. That is why the Templars endure. That is why their secret still survives. In the ruins of castles once flying the Red Cross, in the dark of abandoned commanderies, whispers spoke of gatherings that continued long after the order was declared dead. These were not parades or open rituals. They were small, secret meetings held in cellars, caverns, barns, or crypts beneath churches. Here, men who had once called each other brother gathered in silence, refusing to surrender the vow even when stripped of the cloak. This was the brotherhood beneath. The brotherhood beneath had no banners to rally under. Their strength lay in recognition. A gesture of the hand, a phrase disguised as prayer, a symbol carved into a table. These were the signals by which one knight found another. To outsiders, they were scattered men, exiles, prisoners released into obscurity. To each other, they were still bound, still part of a hidden circle that survived beneath the surface of ordinary life. Such gatherings had many purposes. Some were for remembrance, to recall fallen brothers, and to keep alive the sacred rites that defined them. Others were practical, to pass messages, to organize safe passage, to secure supplies. At times, they became spiritual, as men gathered to pray not in the open halls of the church, but in hidden spaces where they felt God's presence untainted by betrayal. What is striking is how natural this secrecy was for them. They had always lived in silence, always used codes, always hidden wealth in plain sight. The fall of the order did not end these habits, it sharpened them. If before secrecy had been weapon, now it became survival. Each hidden meeting was a spark in darkness, a vow repeated, a memory preserved. Over centuries, these gatherings left traces. Lodges formed around guilds, blending stonecraft with vows. Societies of secrecy arose, claiming descent from those hidden knights. Some exaggerated, inventing connections where none existed. Yet the seed of truth remains. The brotherhood beneath gave rise to traditions of secrecy that shaped Europe long after the flames in Paris. The brotherhood beneath teaches that survival does not always roar. Sometimes it hides, sometimes it waits, sometimes it passes from one man to another in silence, unrecorded, unseen. And though no chronicle names them, no decree records them, their presence can be felt in the echo of societies that thrive on ritual, on vow, on secrecy. They did not need castles or swords. They needed only memory, silence, and one another. That was enough to keep the brotherhood alive beneath the surface of history. There are stories of men who walked alone through villages in the dead of night, cloaked and hooded, their faces unseen, their steps measured. They asked for nothing. They carried no weapons, or at least none visible. Yet their presence was undeniable. They were the night watchers, figures said to be remnants of the order, still guarding roads, chapels, or treasures long after the fall. To some, they were protectors. Farmers told of waking to find their barns guarded by silent figures when thieves threatened. Merchants whispered of safe passage through forests where robbers prowled, guided by men who vanished at dawn. Travellers claimed they saw torches flicker on distant hills, lighting paths when storms closed in. None could explain who these watchers were, but many swore they bore the bearing of knights. To others, they were ghosts. Children warned not to wander at night because the silent riders would take them. Villagers believed the Watchers punished those who mocked the memory of the Order, striking suddenly before melting back into shadows. Priests told tales of penance, saying the souls of the Templars had been condemned to walk the earth until their innocence was proved. The truth is harder to find. Perhaps some survivors of the Order did keep vigil, unable to let go of duty, compelled to guard what they once swore to protect. Perhaps some were impostors, men cloaking themselves in the fearsome reputation of the temple to demand obedience or inspire awe. Or perhaps the night watchers were nothing more than memory itself, villagers seeing in shadows what they feared or longed for, yet the stories endure. In mountain passes, people still point to caves where watchers were said to rest. In coastal villages, they speak of lights that moved on cliffs, as if guiding ships to safety. In ruined commanderies, locals whisper of figures seen at windows long after the walls had crumbled. The night watchers remind us that the Order did not disappear in an instant. Their presence lingered in behaviour, in memory, in the watchfulness of men who could not abandon their vow even after their institution had been destroyed. They lived on in stories because vigilance was their nature. They were created to guard pilgrims, and even in exile, even in ruin, they remained guardians, watching roads, watching chapels, watching memory itself. The Watchers became legend because they embodied what people most wanted from the Order: protection. In a world of war and betrayal, the idea that someone still watched in silence brought comfort. Whether true or not, the Watchers walked on, in shadows, in memory, in myth. And perhaps they walk still. In the end, when we strip away the legends of treasure, the whispers of curses, the stories of fleets and grails, what remains? What is the true legacy of the Knights Templar? The one that cannot be erased, cannot be buried, cannot be burned. It is not gold, it is not relics, it is not castles. It is something more enduring, the idea they created. Their legacy is the proof that silence can outlast fire, that men bound by vow can defy kings and popes, not by rebellion, but by endurance. That memory, once planted, grows stronger than decrees. This is the legacy that cannot die, because it belongs not to them alone, but to every generation that has retold their story. Their legacy is discipline. In a world of chaos, they embodied structure knights who were also monks, warriors who were also servants. Their model reshaped what it meant to hold power. Even today, echoes of their organization can be seen in systems of banking, in codes of honor, in traditions of secrecy. Their legacy is myth. They became more than men, more than soldiers. They became symbols, and symbols do not die. They expand, they transform, they reappear. A burned order became a living legend. A destroyed brotherhood became an eternal story. The legacy that cannot die also lies in questions. Who were they truly? What did they guard? Where did their ships go? Did they hold the Grail? Did they hide treasures beneath Roslin? Each unanswered question breathes life into the Order, ensuring they are never forgotten. The lack of closure is their immortality. We may never know the full truth. Perhaps that is by design. The Templars built their strength on silence and secrecy. Why would death undo that? Their greatest treasure may never have been meant to be revealed. It may have been meant to remain hidden, to ensure the story itself carries forward, alive as long as we ask. That is why the Templars cannot die. They live in imagination, in wonder, in curiosity. They live in the shadow they cast over thrones, in the silence they left in history, in the symbols carved into stone. They live every time their name is spoken, every time a story is told, every time a question is asked. The Order fell in fire, yet from fire they became eternal. Their legacy is not ruin, but resilience, not treasure, but memory, not endings, but beginnings. And so, though centuries have passed, though their banners are gone, their legacy endures. The Knights Templar remain, not in flesh, but in the story that will never die. Among the treasures seized from the order, kings found gold, lands, livestock, and scrolls of finance. But one thing was whispered about more than all the others, a codex said to contain the deepest secrets of the temple. Some believed it held instructions for their network, others that it preserved rituals too sacred to reveal. Chroniclers called it by many names: the Secret Rule, the Black Book, the Codex of Solomon. Yet none could produce it. The vanished codex became the most enduring riddle of the Templars. If it existed, it was no ordinary manuscript. The rule of the order was already known, copied in Latin and read across Christendom. The vanished codex was said to go beyond rules. It was knowledge gathered from east and west, collected in Jerusalem, Damascus, Cairo, and Constantinople. Maps of seas unknown, medical formulas from Arabic scholars, mystical writings, drawn from Hebrew and Greek sources, even fragments of texts thought lost to time. It was a library bound into one book. Why would such a text vanish? Because it was too dangerous to fall into royal or papal hands. The brothers knew what was at stake. They had seen kingdoms rise and fall, witnessed crusades succeed and collapse. They understood that knowledge, not gold, was their true treasure. A chest of coins could be seized. A book of secrets could change the world. Theories abound. Some say the codex was hidden before the arrests, sealed in vaults beneath Paris, or carried on ships from La Rochelle. Others claim it was dispersed, pages separated, and smuggled into guild lodges, where fragments lived on as cryptic rituals. A few even believe it was burned by the brothers themselves, destroyed rather than risk misuse. Yet if it had been destroyed, would the whispers still persist? Perhaps the truth lies in the silence. The Templars never confirmed such a codex, but neither did they deny it. The absence of denial became fuel. Kings hunted for it, popes demanded it, chroniclers hinted at it, but it never appeared. Its very vanishing became proof of its power. The vanished codex reminds us that the greatest treasures are not always objects. They are ideas, bound in ink and parchment, guarded by silence, hidden by vow. Whether it survives or not is almost irrelevant. What matters is that it left a mark in memory, shaping centuries of curiosity. The codex may never be found. Yet in its absence, it lives on, like the order itself, invisible yet enduring. Every legend needs a figure to walk through time, carrying its memory. For the Templars, this figure is not a ghostly knight with sword raised, nor a cloaked brother hiding treasure. It is the eternal pilgrim, a man who walks endlessly, never resting, never aging, always moving along roads that once led to Jerusalem. The eternal pilgrim appears in stories across Europe. In Spain, he is said to walk the Camino, guiding travellers by lantern light. In France, he wanders between ruined commanderies, kneeling in chapels long abandoned. In Germany, he passes through villages at dusk, blessing children before vanishing into woods. Always alone, always silent, always carrying the aura of the order. Some believe he is a survivor of the arrests, cursed to walk until the temple is restored. Others think he is symbol, embodying the vow of pilgrimage the knights once guarded. A few insist he is no man at all, but memory given form, an idea that walks among us. Why does this figure endure? Because he represents continuity. Though castles fall, though banners burn, the pilgrim still walks. He cannot be chained, cannot be silenced, cannot be erased. His journey is unending, his path eternal. He reminds us that the spirit of the order was not bound to lands or fortresses, but to movement, to the constant act of going forward. In truth, the eternal pilgrim may have been nothing more than men who adopted the cloak of memory, wandering monks, ex-knights, hermits. Yet the legend elevates them. It turns every solitary figure on the road into potential carrier of the temple's secret. Every traveller becomes a reminder of survival. the eternal pilgrim still walks in our minds. Every time we ask about the Templars, we join him on the road. Every time we wonder about their fate, we take another step beside him. He does not arrive because arrival is not his purpose. His purpose is to continue. The eternal pilgrim ensures the story of the Templars never ends, because the journey itself never does. At the core of the temple was a vow: poverty, chastity, obedience. But above all, silence and loyalty unto death. It was this vow that held them together, that gave them strength, that made them more than ordinary soldiers. When the order fell, when brothers were tortured and burned, that vow was tested as never before, and it held. The last oath became their ultimate treasure, carried to the grave and beyond. We know their enemies demanded confessions. Some gave them, broken by pain. Yet many recanted, choosing death over betrayal. In doing so, they proved that the oath was stronger than flesh. Fire consumed their bodies, but not their loyalty. Silence carried them beyond pain, beyond fear, beyond life itself. This last oath became the seed of their immortality. Because it was never broken, their secrets survived. Because it was never betrayed, their legend endured. Kings won land, but not truth. Popes silenced men, but not memory. The last oath outlasted both. The oath also became contagious. Survivors carried it into guilds, into brotherhoods, into rituals that echoed the vows of the temple. Each secret society that claimed descent from them, whether true or not, was in some way repeating the last oath. It spread not because of treasure, but because of example. To swear loyalty even unto death is rare. To hold it against fire and crown is unforgettable. What does the last oath mean for us now? It is reminder. That power lies not in wealth or armies, but in vow. That silence can protect more than walls. That loyalty can create legacies beyond death. The Templars left no dynasty, no lasting kingdom, but they left an oath, and that oath built a legend that kings could not erase. The last oath still speaks. Every time their story is told, we repeat it. Every time we wonder what they carried, we honour it. Every time we remember their silence, we share in it. The last oath binds us too, because to remember is to participate in loyalty. Thus the Templars did not die in fire, they transformed. Their last oath became their first immortality, and that oath, carried across centuries, still binds them to us.